Our story begins in the year 2624 at the second high school of Lijiang City, where the class transfer ceremony was taking place. The event gathered all the students who, from that moment on, would define the course of their lives. On stage, Luo Heng, president of Lijiang's second high school, was giving a long and serious speech. He explained that choosing a class was extremely important, as it would determine each student's future. Therefore, everyone should think very carefully before deciding. Even so, the vast majority dreamed of choosing combat-oriented classes, such as warrior, berserker, and others like them. To understand why this choice was so important, it is necessary to go back a few years into the past. It all started with a virtual reality game called Eternal. The game had such an absurd level of realism that many people ended up addicted, treating that virtual world as if it were a second real world. However, something unexpected happened. The world of Eternal, where people spent so much time connected, ended up merging with reality. Because of that, countless monsters began to appear in the real world, causing destruction and killing many people. However, if the game had become real, then the abilities also came along. Humanity awakened powers similar to those in the game and began fighting monsters in order to survive. In the midst of this chaotic scenario, there was a boy named Zhou Yi, the protagonist of the story. He was a reincarnated person, but it seemed that all his luck had been completely consumed. Shortly after reincarnating, and before he could even adapt to his new life, his mother died. To make things even worse, his sister Zhou Yun contracted an incurable disease. In truth, there was a way to keep her alive, but it required the help of high-level priests, which cost an absurd amount of money. To pay for his sister's treatment, Zhou Yi sold everything he had. As time went on, money became increasingly scarce. Now he desperately needed to find a way to earn money, and the only possible option was to hunt monsters. However, to do that, he first needed to obtain a class. While Zhou Yi was reflecting on his situation, a mage responsible for the ceremony explained that the class transfer was about to begin. He informed them that each student would be called by name, and upon hearing their name, they should step into a magic circle that was being formed using mana. Shortly after, 6 circles were completed, and a teacher from class 5 named Yang began calling the students one by one. During this process, Zhou Yi mentally explained how the class system worked. There were thousands of possible classes, but the system always offered only 3 options considered the most suitable for each person. In a world full of monsters, combat classes were the most desired. Support classes, on the other hand, were despised and seen as useless, which is why some students ended up kneeling and crying when they received bad options. Time passed, and several students were called until it was finally Zhou Yi's turn. As he walked toward the magic circle, another teacher named Tang Tianjun began mocking the rival class. He commented that his class was superior since, out of 40 students, 21 had awakened combat classes, while the other class had only 16. That clearly showed his arrogance and competitiveness. Ignoring that discussion, everyone's attention turned back to Zhou Yi. Suddenly, the necklace he wore around his neck began to shine intensely. A gigantic light emerged, and at the same time the system appeared. It was the famous system everyone knew. That necklace belonged to Zhou Yi's previous life. He did not know how the item ended up in his new life. In the past, he tried analyzing it using skills but never found anything special. Therefore, he had completely given up on that item. However, at that moment, something finally happened. Zhou Yi awakened a talent called Divine Angel Protection, ranked S+. This talent drastically increased his affinity with light, reaching an absurd level. In the current world, talents directly influenced the available classes, ranging from rank F to rank S, with S+ being practically legendary. Faced with that overwhelming light, a massive pillar of light formed. From within it, a goddess descended from the heavens. She looked at everyone present, spread her wings, and declared that light was Zhou Yi's power, stating that she would always be by his side. Then she gently touched his forehead, causing a glowing symbol to appear above his head. Right after that, 3 large holograms appeared in the air, representing the classes Zhou Yi could choose. According to the mage in charge, that indicated a hidden class. The 3 options presented were Light Mage, Holy Priest, and Paladin. First, Zhou Yi carefully analyzed the 3 available class options. The Light Mage was extremely powerful in terms of burst damage, but had major limitations. It consumed a lot of resources and had almost no ability to save others, being efficient only for direct destruction. Although interesting, that class did not meet his actual needs. Next, he considered the Holy Priest. This class had impressive healing power and could save countless lives. However, its offensive capability was almost non-existent. Furthermore, the priest heavily depended depended on others to survive in combat, something Zhou Yi could not afford at that moment. For that reason, he dismissed the option. Lastly, there was the Paladin. This class offered a balanced combination of defense and offense, being able to withstand great damage while fighting on the front lines. For Zhou Yi, that was clearly the ideal choice. Without hesitation, he chose the Paladin. As soon as the decision was made, the Paladin hologram moved slowly and conveyed the meaning of that class. It explained that the constant pursuit of justice and righteousness was the true path of a Paladin. Right after that statement, an armor covered Zhou Yi's body as the system officially announced that he had awakened the Paladin class. The choice had barely ended, and Zhou Yi was already drawing attention from everyone around him. Many students came over wanting to befriend him, suggesting they study together in the future. Even some teachers tried to convince him to follow them and become their disciple. However, after all the commotion, Zhou Yi returned home. In his room, he began to distribute the attribute points he had received upon awakening his class. As soon as he finished, he immediately noticed a significant increase in his physical strength and overall capabilities. As a result of that action, the system activated a mission for him. That was something extremely valuable, as system missions could offer important rewards directly related to his class. Without a second thought, Zhou Yi accepted. The moment he confirmed the mission, he was teleported to the interior of an unknown mine. He barely had time to observe his surroundings before being suddenly attacked. That was the first time Zhou Yi had faced a monster directly in real combat. Even under pressure, he decided to test the abilities he had received as a paladin. As soon as he began to move, he realized that the class had granted his body powerful reinforcement. He felt lighter than ever and could easily dodge most of the monster's attacks. Still, a surprise strike hit him directly in the abdomen, causing him to bleed heavily. Despite the injury, Zhou Yi had a slow regeneration skill ranked C, which began gradually healing his wounds. In addition to his defensive and healing abilities, he also had offensive techniques. One of them was the Light Cross, which released luminous energy against the enemy. Another skill was Tiger Claw, which he used to attack the monster with brutal force. Combining those skills with his high affinity for light, the monster had no chance to react. In a short time, Zhou Yi managed to completely defeat it. After the victory, the system presented 3 possible rewards. The first option was to receive 10 skill points. The second was to obtain new exclusive paladin abilities. The third option was to gain a random piece of paladin equipment. Considering that skill points could be easily obtained by leveling up and that he did not need new abilities at the moment, Zhou Yi chose the equipment. He had no money to buy weapons or armor, so that was the best choice. As a reward, the system granted him a sword. Immediately after, Zhou Yi was transported back to his room. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the protagonist's sister, Zhou Yun, was watching the news about her own brother on television. The commotion caused by his awakening had spread quickly. Suddenly, the head nurse entered the room, turned off the television, and began demanding payment for the hospital expenses, which had already exceeded 10,000. That frightened Zhou Yun, since the cost had only been 5,000 the previous month. The situation had already been difficult, and now it seemed even more desperate. The head nurse coldly explained that the costs had increased due to several factors, including expensive medication, multiple relapses of the illness, and the need for constant overnight monitoring. While she was making those demands, a man suddenly appeared and intervened. He commented that the head nurse seemed far too agitated and suggested that she leave, implying that otherwise it would be necessary to speak directly with the hospital dean. Faced with that, the nurse ended up leaving. Alone with the man, Zhou Yun began to wonder if he might be a loan shark or someone from whom her brother had borrowed money. However, that suspicion was soon dismissed when the man introduced himself as a friend of Zhou Yi. Speaking of Zhou Yi again, not long after that, he arrived at the hospital room holding the bank statement he had just received. The balance showed 100,000, which left him completely confused since he had no idea where the money had come from. As he tried to understand the situation, he noticed some strange men speaking with his sister. One of them introduced himself as Zhao Wen, the mayor's secretary. He explained that he was there to discuss an important matter. Since it was not a simple topic, it was clear that the conversation should not take place inside a hospital room. For that reason, they decided to go somewhere more appropriate. Sometime later, already seated in a cafe, the place was full of people commenting about Zhou Yi, since the commotion caused by his awakening was still a hot topic. During the conversation, Zhao Wen began by thanking and praising Zhou Yi, stating that it had not been just luck, as he had awakened an S-rank talent. Because of that, the mayor had decided to suppress interviews and public exposure to avoid further complications. In addition, City Hall intended to provide Zhou Yi with various resources, including a personal vault. They had also hired nurses to care for Zhou Yun around the clock, along with a level 36 priest, considered extremely high. In short, everything had already been arranged to ensure Zhou Yi would stay on their side, hoping that in the future he would repay the favor in some way. After all, nothing in that world was truly free. Faced with that situation, Zhou Yi understood that accepting their help was the best choice at that moment. After that, he returned to his sister's room and explained everything that had happened. Zhou Yun was visibly happy to hear that her medical situation would now be more stable. Taking the opportunity, she asked what abilities he had awakened with his class. Zhou Yi explained that he had three main abilities. The first was an offensive light-based skill. The second was slow regeneration, which provided continuous healing. The third was a blessing that functioned as a support type. He then used slow regeneration on his sister. Although the illness was not cured, Zhou Yun felt immediate relief and began to feel considerably better. The next day back at school, the principal announced that several professors from the 4 top universities were present to recruit Zhou Yi. The institutions were Rongyang University, Chuan University, Anji University, and Hancheng University. Upon hearing this, Zhou Yi asked whether the top 3 universities in the country had shown up. The principal explained that they had not, since those institutions only held their own entrance exams and did not participate in special recruitments. Sometime later, Zhou Yi was taken to a room where the university representatives were gathered. Present were Professor Zhou Tianfu from Rongyang University, Professor Li Bing from Chuannan University, Professor Zhu Yu from Hancheng University, and Professor Yu Yuan from Anji University. Zhou Yi politely greeted them all, which surprised the professors, as many expected someone with an S-rank talent to be arrogant. After the initial formalities, the first to make an offer was Zhou Tianfu. He explained that if Zhou Yi enrolled at Rongyang University, he would receive 2 million in financial resources and 3 exclusive skill books. That offer was absurd, considering Zhou Yi previously earned only 6,000 per month. Next, Professor Li Bing presented an even more aggressive proposal. He offered 3 million, 3 skill books, and 3 level 56 mentors who would personally train him. Right after, Professor Zhu Yu explained that her university was not as wealthy, but she could still offer 2 million. Additionally, upon enrollment, Zhou Yi would receive a level B practice resource, which, according to the principal, was extremely valuable. Even in the face of all those tempting offers, Zhou Yi rejected them all. He explained that his goal was to enter one of the top 3 universities in the country, as each of them had their own strengths and weaknesses, but were superior in overall quality. Upon hearing this response, Zhou Tianfu began to laugh ironically. He then released his aura, pressuring Zhou Yi directly, while commenting that it was interesting for him to have such ambition, even though he had yet to prove anything in the real world. Throughout his 18 years of life, Zhou Yi had always been treated as someone ordinary, almost insignificant. Now that so many opportunities were in front of him, it seemed absurd to many that he would simply reject everything just to try to get into the top 3 universities. To several people, that looked like pure arrogance. Even if he managed to pass, he would probably rank at the bottom and would not receive any of the generous resources currently being offered. The situation began to grow tense, but before it got worse, the principal stepped in to protect his student. Professor Zhu Yu was surprised to see that Zhou Yi remained standing even under the pressure of Professor Zhou Tianfu's aura. Still, it was clear that, in the eyes of the recruiters, Zhou Yi showed overly grand ambitions and seemed to look down on the present universities. Because of this, the professors decided to leave. Before leaving, Professor Zhu Yu still tried to advise him, explaining that the dream was interesting but also quite extravagant. She believed it was necessary to recognize one's own limits. Zhou Yi, however, replied that he would use his results to prove his strength. He fully trusted the system, as he knew that the great entrance exam for the top 3 universities would take place in 1 month. By then, he believed he could become much stronger. Faced with that response, the only thing the professor could say was to wish him good luck. 1 month passed, and the grand exam finally began. Many candidates were shocked to learn that a being known as a demon would be responsible for administering the test. Among the participants, various rumors about Zhou Yi were circulating, and most people mocked him, believing he had no chance. When Zhou Yi appeared, some noticed something strange. Every movement he made, even his breathing, conveyed an intense sense of strength. Shortly after, a large portal displayed all the information about the exam. The participants would have to face a dungeon that varied in difficulty from easy to hard, and it could be completed in groups of 1 to 5 people. The atmosphere grew heavy. Many became fearful, as they knew this was not a typical test. The instructor ordered everyone to remain silent and prepare themselves, making it clear that anyone who died inside the dungeon would truly die. This was not a game. When the countdown ended, everyone was teleported into the dungeon. Spectators began watching the broadcasts. Most participants entered in groups, while Zhou Yi appeared completely alone, and even worse, at nightmare difficulty. Upon seeing this, the director of the education department, Zhan Tao, commented to Luo Heng that this choice was extremely dangerous. A paladin was a support and tank class, which meant it was supposed to fight in a team. Furthermore, the nightmare difficulty had a mortality rate of 40%. In his opinion, Zhou Yi was practically throwing away all the reputation, effort, and resources invested by the Lijiang city government. Director Luo Heng tried to ease the situation, saying that Zhou Yi probably had something prepared, and indeed he did. Inside the dungeon, Zhou Yi wielded a massive axe. As soon as the first monster appeared, he defeated it with a single strike. Although he was officially level 10, his stats were equivalent to those of a level 13, not to mention his skills. Among his abilities was the Blessing of the Weapon, which, when combined with his Divine Angel Protection talent, increased the weapon's star level by 2. Zhou Yi's axe already had 3 stars, which made it extremely powerful. A single swing was enough to eliminate all the surrounding monsters. In addition, he possessed another ability called Pure White Blade, an X-shaped attack that pierced through enemies. Once again, combined with the Divine Angel Protection talent, any object infused with sacred energy launched by Zhou Yi became lethal. In this way, the monsters stood no chance against him. Faced with such a massacre, the audience began praising Zhou Yi, commenting on how impressive he was. Many were surprised by how directly and efficiently he handled the monsters. One of the professors present pointed out that Zhou Yi's abilities were absurdly high for someone at his level, something truly rare to see. Even while recognizing his talent, Director Zhan Tao maintained a more cautious analysis. He explained that Zhou Yi had a strong combat instinct, but still lacked real battle experience. According to him, on nightmare difficulty, not only were the monsters extremely strong, but their numbers were also overwhelming. Since Zhou Yi had chosen a very heavy axe, he would inevitably grow tired over time, and that would be his biggest mistake. However, in practice, that did not seem to happen. On Zhou Yi's side, he kept advancing without difficulty, unleashing axe blows that eliminated multiple monsters at once. When he noticed the weight of the weapon might slow him down, he simply switched to the Pure White Blade, maintaining his combat pace without losing efficiency. The battle continued in this manner, with Zhou Yi cutting down a large number of monsters until there were no enemies left in that area. As soon as the last monster fell, a portal opened before him, indicating the entrance to the next level. This new floor was also completely filled with monsters, showing that the challenge was far from over. Meanwhile, among the spectators, the broadcast of the battle caused a major stir. It was highlighted that Zhou Yi had completed the first stage in just 3 minutes and 17 seconds, a time that left many viewers shocked. The same professor who had claimed Zhou Yi would tire insisted that he should not be taking on the challenge alone and that fighting in a group would be more appropriate. However, Zhou Yi's results silenced all criticism. Back on the battlefield, Zhou Yi faced a new wave of enemies. There were regular feline demons, fluorescent demons, and fire demons. Unlike the first stage, this phase was much harder because the monsters did not attack individually. They acted in formation, like a true army, with well-defined roles, including support units, tanks, and damage dealers. This made the battle much more complex. As soon as the fight began, Zhou Yi was quickly immobilized while the damage-dealing demons charged at him. Even so, the situation did not last long. Zhou Yi activated a skill called Holy Light Cross, causing a massive burst of light to spread around him. Most of the demons were instantly wiped out. This ability worked by creating a large cross of light behind Zhou Yi, dealing continuous light damage to all nearby enemies for several seconds. What impressed the spectators the most was the fact that this ability was ranked B. According to the director of the education department, the higher the rank of a skill, the harder it was to obtain. The fact that Zhou Yi already possessed an ability of that level made it clear that he had received heavy investment from the city government. After the attack, the only enemy still standing was a minotaur, who immediately launched a counterattack. Even so, the fight was brief. Zhou Yi combined a light-based strike with his Pure White Blade and cut the minotaur in half. Even wounded, the monster tried to resist, but Zhou Yi finished it by stomping hard on its head. Right after, a new portal opened, indicating that the stage had been completed. The duration of this phase was only 39 seconds, which left everyone completely shocked, including the director of education himself. Considering Zhou Yi had awakened his class only a month ago, his power level was terrifying. Without even stopping to rest, Zhou Yi immediately advanced to the next stage, causing panic among the spectators. Director Zhan Tao asked everyone to remain calm, stating that Zhou Yi probably still had some trump card hidden. It became clear that Zhou Yi was facing everything alone, and on nightmare difficulty difficulty with a specific goal in mind. That way he could earn more rewards, level up quickly, and unlock various achievements. In the next stage, Zhou Yi found himself facing a level 16 king. The creature's abilities could not be seen, and it had a serpentine appearance. The enemy tried to demoralize Zhou Yi with constant taunts. However, this time, Zhou Yi reacted differently. He activated his true power, stacking blessings and several strengthening effects, even forming an armor around his body. Only then did Zhou Yi charge at the Bull King, revealing the paladin's primary form. Even with armor and axe and filled with buffs, Zhou Yi's attacks barely did any damage to the king. The problem became even more evident when it was revealed that the king himself also wielded an axe. With a single brutal blow, Zhou Yi was thrown far across the battlefield. Despite the strength of the attack, he neither died nor suffered serious injuries, thanks to the extremely durable armor he was wearing. Still, Zhou Yi understood he couldn't keep fighting the same way. He realized he needed to act more cautiously from that point on. With no room for error, he decided to activate another skill, called Spear of Victory, which summoned multiple spears of light capable of dealing great damage to enemies. As he launched these attacks, Zhou Yi began to reflect on the situation. The Bull King was extremely powerful, with absurd strength and vitality. In a direct confrontation, defeating him alone seemed nearly impossible. However, Zhou Yi also knew that the teachers would not create a challenge without a solution. That meant there had to be a proper way to win that battle. Thinking calmly, Zhou Yi identified the true weakness of the Minotaur. Despite his enormous vitality, his defense and agility were not as high as they appeared. Vitality and defense were not the same thing. With that in mind, Zhou Yi completely changed his strategy. Instead of attacking repeatedly, he began to focus on single strikes that were extremely powerful and precise, saving energy and dealing real damage with each blow. Following that strategy, after landing a few heavy and well-calculated hits, Zhou Yi finally managed to cut the Bull King in half. Victory did not come easily and required great effort, but in the end, he was able to defeat the enemy. With that, Zhou Yi completed the nightmare mode of the Forest of Darkness dungeon. The total time was 9 minutes and 24 seconds. As soon as the results were processed, it became clear that he had achieved first place. This genuinely made him happy. After all, reaching first place is hardly something anyone would be unhappy about. However, Zhou Yi's happiness didn't come only from victory. Looking back on everything he had faced up to that point, his mother's death, the responsibility of caring for his sick sister, and the constant weight of hardship, he realized just how suffocating it all had been. Even so, in such a cruel environment, he never chose to give up. When he couldn't improve his attributes, Zhou Yi dedicated himself to training his combat skills and strengthening his awareness. The appearance of the system and powerful abilities had been a turning point, but his heart had never changed. With or without a system, he would keep fighting the same way, always giving his best. Additionally, he received several valuable items as rewards for completing the dungeon, but that became secondary. The moment he left the dungeon, Zhou Yi was greeted by a wave of applause. Many people shouted his name, and even the director of his academy appeared, accompanied by the director of education, both congratulating him on his impressive feat. Shortly after, a man arrived in a luxury car, drawing even more attention. It was announced that the official results would be available in 3 days. Until then, they asked Zhou Yi to rest and take the opportunity to visit his sister. Speaking of her, after Zhou Yi's conversation with Zhao Wen, the mayor's secretary, the promises made were fulfilled quickly. On the same day, Zhou Yun was transferred to the most luxurious room in the hospital. In addition, professionals were assigned to monitor her 24 hours a day, ensuring she received the best possible treatment. In any case, after clearing the dungeon, Zhou Yi wanted to personally tell his sister about his victory. As soon as the elevator door opened on the floor where she was hospitalized, an extreme wave of cold swept through the entire place. Ice spread in every direction, and several people were frozen in place, trapped in expressions of pure despair. Faced with that scene, Zhou Yi immediately understood it was connected to his sister. Without hesitation, he ran toward her room. Upon entering, he felt a suffocating pressure and sensed the enormous aura of an ice dragon. Inside the room, a woman was trying to contain the situation while Zhou Yun remained unconscious. Instinctively, Zhou Yi attempted to attack the ice dragon, but was stopped. The woman explained that such an action could not be done rashly. That dragon was not just an external manifestation, but rather the core of Zhou Yun's instability. If it were attacked directly, her heart would shatter, as that entity functioned as a vital extension of her body. Furthermore, the cold spreading through the hospital was coming from inside Zhou Yun. Everything around was gradually being frozen. The only reason the advance of the ice had been slowed for a few moments was thanks to the efforts of a girl named Qing, who had temporarily managed to contain the cold's spread. Even so, she was already at her limit. Without that item, everyone there would have already been frozen. The woman explained that even though she was an experienced priestess, she could only hold back the ice for a short time. She made it clear that only a very high-level priest would have a real chance of stabilizing the situation. In response, Zhou Yi made an immediate decision. He used the power of the system to raise his slow regeneration ability to the highest level he could at that moment, reaching level 10. With this ability active, he began continuously healing Zhou Yun, relieving part of the pain caused by the extreme cold leaking from within her body. At the same time, this regeneration also helped Qing, who was being affected by prolonged exposure to the ice. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Zhou Yi asked Qing to go find a high-level priest as quickly as possible. To save time, he suggested she contact Qing, someone with many connections. Zhou Yi promised that in the future he would do something important for Qing without imposing any conditions if she helped in that critical moment. While Qing left to seek help, Zhou Yi remained at his sister's side. He realized that the pain Zhou Yun was experiencing came from the intense cold building up inside her, which was now manifesting outward. Even while suffering immensely, she continued to endure. Zhou Yi spent the entire day beside her, keeping the ability active without interruption. When night fell, something unexpected happened. A green energy sphere flew across the room at high speed, colliding several times with the ice dragon. Each impact made the entity tremble, causing visible damage. The dragon's aura began to destabilize rapidly. Before anyone could react, a woman entered the room. With precise movements, she made a few gestures in the air, as if drawing complex symbols. In just a few moments, the ice dragon was sealed and forced to return inside Zhou Yun. The moment this happened, all the ice around began to melt. The walls, the floor, and even the frozen people were instantly freed. The environment returned to normal as if nothing had ever happened. The woman then introduced herself as Cui Liana, a level 35 priestess. She explained that she had been called there by Director Zhan Tao, although she initially had no intention of answering the request. However, upon hearing that the provincial champion needed help, she decided to show up in person. Taking advantage of the presence of someone so powerful, Zhou Yi asked if there was a definitive cure for his sister's condition. Cui Liana explained that it was not exactly a disease. In reality, it was the awakening of an ancient bloodline. To explain better, she went back about 200 years to when the game Ethere merged with the real world. Inside the game, there were various races, such as elves, giants, demons, and many others. At the time of the fusion, people who played Ethere ended up partially or fully transforming into the race they had chosen within the game. As generations passed, those people mixed with regular humans. Gradually, the external characteristics of those races faded away. However, one thing never disappeared: the awakening of the bloodline. According to Cui Liana, this awakening could be either a blessing or a curse, depending entirely on the person's body constitution. In Zhou Yun's case, she carried an extremely rare ice-related bloodline. The problem was that her human body could not withstand this power. For the awakening to be completed without killing her, it would be necessary to alter her body constitution. According to Cui Liana, the only real way to resolve the problem was to find a frozen lotus, an extremely rare item. The ice bloodline itself was already nearly extinct, and an item capable of modifying someone's body to handle that power was even harder to find. The last time a frozen lotus appeared was 30 years ago at an auction, where a mysterious man paid $1,300,000 for it. Still, there was another solution. It was possible to completely seal the ice bloodline. Cui Liana explained that this decision would be left in Zhou Yi's hands. Sealing the bloodline would eliminate all the risks and pain, but at a high cost. Zhou Yun would no longer be able to evolve or level up in the future. It was a difficult choice, trading safety in the present for the loss of future potential. 5 days later, Zhou Yi was training calmly. The system he possessed gave him points each day he trained. He always chose attribute points, since this allowed him to distribute them in the way he found most efficient. His standard was balanced, keeping his attributes as close as possible, since he fought alone and needed to be versatile in every situation. Additionally, it was officially confirmed that Zhou Yi had secured first place in the province. With that, he received multiple rewards, including new skills, special cards, and other valuable resources. Overall, his power increased significantly in a short period of time. Meanwhile, the newspapers could talk about nothing but Zhou Yi. Reports highlighted that he had come in first place in the province, that his class change was absurd, and that his growth was unprecedented. Several rumors began to circulate, and even the director of the Department of Education took the opportunity to say he had a good eye for recognizing such a promising talent. Even so, some people still tried to doubt Zhou Yi's strength. For many, a paladin was a support class, normally used in teams. The fact that Zhou Yi fought alone seemed contradictory. However, the videos recorded inside the dungeon left no room for doubt. Faced with the footage, everyone had to accept the truth. Among those watching everything closely was a red-haired blonde-haired young man, the second place in the province. He finished just 20 seconds behind Zhou Yi. Instead of being frustrated, he was excited, as if he had finally found someone worthy to face. For him, that defeat seemed to awaken a strong desire for competition. At the same time, Zhou Yi received an unexpected notification. 7 million yuans had been deposited into his bank account. 5 million came from the municipal government, and the other 2 million were from the city hall. Surprised by the amount, he immediately contacted Zhao Wen, the mayor's secretary, to understand what was going on. Zhao Wen explained that the government had awarded the 5 million as a reward for placing first in the province. Additionally, Zhou Yi was entitled to a luxury house and could freely choose its location. As if that weren't enough, the secretary also mentioned that admission professors from the top 3 universities were trying to contact him, and in fact, they were already there. The first to appear was a special admissions professor from Rongyang University, the same bald man who had previously looked down on Zhou Yi. Before any conversation could even start, another man arrived by helicopter, stating that the Magic University would offer double whatever Rongyang University had proposed. Before Zhou Yi could respond, a professor suddenly appeared and simply grabbed him, lifting him into the air. She declared that she was from Qingjing University and claimed that her institution had enough resources to ensure the best possible cultivation for him. The situation looked like a kidnapping. Right after that, another professor appeared and scolded her for such impulsive behavior, warning that it was dangerous and that everyone should return to the ground immediately. Once they landed, this professor also introduced herself. Her name was Su Mei, a member of the Special Admissions Office at Su Kang University, the highest ranked among the top 3 universities in the country. With the representatives of the 3 universities gathered, an intense discussion began right there. Each tried to prove that their institution was the best choice for Zhou Yi, making it clear that his decision would have a huge impact on his future. Meanwhile, Zhou Yi thought about which university he should attend. In the end, the 3 options were quite similar, but by looking at the details, he ended up choosing Su Kang University. As soon as he made his decision, Professor Su Mei presented a contract for him to sign. At the same time, the other professor, with purple hair, explained that if Zhou Yi ever wanted to leave that institution in the future, he could try transferring to Qingjing University. What really caught Zhou Yi's attention was the floating pamphlet in front of him, something clearly created through a powerful ability. This happened because Su Mei was a level 2 mage and had reached level 42, indicating some kind of class evolution or specialization. Even without fully understanding that system, Zhou Yi chose not to question it for now. Without further delay, Zhou Yi signed the contract. Su Mei told him to start packing, as he would be traveling to the university the following week, which felt too soon. According to her, special students needed to receive advanced training as early as possible in order to evolve in the shortest possible time. Sometime later, Zhou Yi went to visit the mansion he had received from the city government. The place was absurdly large. According to Secretary Zhao Wen, the mansion had 3 floors and around 1,000 square meters, including a huge living room and a special training area. It was also decided that Qing would stay by Zhou Yun's side while Zhou Yi was away at the university. After that, nothing unusual happened. A time skip of 1 week followed. During this period, Zhou Yi told his sister to be careful, showing the typical concern of an older brother. Zhou Yun, in turn, pretended to listen and said she already knew everything. Just before the trip, Professor Su Mei asked if it was Zhou Yi's first time traveling so far, and he confirmed that it was. The journey itself barely existed, as in the very next moment, the car was teleported to another location. They instantly arrived at Sukyang University City. Zhou Yi was confused, wondering why there was such a rush that they needed to use a teleportation gate. Normally, no one was allowed to use that kind of technology without military clearance, but Sukang University had that authorization. Observing the place, Zhou Yi saw that the university was massive, looking more like a mountain range than a school, resembling the grand settings of the Murin world. Refocusing, Su Mei explained that it was time for him to register. However, as soon as Zhou Yi stepped onto the campus, a student suddenly came flying through the air. The one responsible was a white-haired girl with golden eyes that quickly turned purple. Despite the violent impact, the student did not die. More importantly, Zhou Yi noticed that the girl had a demonic bloodline, made obvious by the magical patterns on her body. Seeing his reaction, Su Mei asked Zhou Yi not to be prejudiced, explaining that the university had many different bloodlines and that understanding was necessary. Zhou Yi replied that he was fine with it, even though a demonic bloodline had been responsible for his father's death. Next, Su Mei handed Zhou Yi his official ID badge. It displayed his ranking and current score. To help him understand, Su Mei explained the university's structure. First of all, there was a ranking system, which was reset every year, with each year having its own leaderboard. leaderboard. As an example, freshmen also had their own ranking system. This ranking was temporary, but at that moment, Zhou Yi held first place for having ranked first in the entrance exam. Even so, this position was not fixed, since any other freshman could challenge him and take his place if he lost. For that reason, Zhou Yi intended to defend his position, as being at the top brought clear advantages. Within the university structure, the ranking system served as a direct reinforcement to the point system. These points worked like an internal currency and could be used for practically everything, such as buying equipment, food, access to special areas, and even hiring professors for individual training. In addition, there were two main ways to earn points. The first was through point missions, which required the use of a level D card. The second was through the celestial and earthly rankings, which were lists of the academy's top students. Getting into those lists was no easy task, as around 5,000 students constantly competed to have their names recorded there and receive large amounts of points. Moreover, Sukang University had three major training realms. The first was the Goblin Dungeon, recommended for levels between 17 and 21. The second was the Twisted Forest, with a recommended entry level between 23 and 26. The third and final was the Purgatory, where the minimum level ranged between 28 and 31. These realms could not be accessed freely. Each entry required a point payment. In general, those who had more resources and used them wisely ended up becoming stronger. Faced with such a complete system, Zhou Yi felt very satisfied. While Professor Su Mei was walking with Zhou Yi, they came across another group of students being guided by a different professor. Some of those students began to question why Su Mei was accompanying only one student, while they were in a group of 10. A student named Wang Li explained that it was simple. When a professor guided only one student, it meant that student was extremely talented. He then revealed that the student being guided by Su Mei was the top-ranked candidate from the Lijiang district, a level 13 paladin. Upon hearing this, most of them did not believe it, including the white-haired, golden-eyed girl with the demonic bloodline. For many, it made no sense that a paladin considered a support class had surpassed the second-place candidate, Shen Ling Feng, a level 14 berserker. Even so, the demonic girl became visibly excited upon realizing that the person who had walked past her was the first-place candidate. In contrast, one of the students became furious and claimed that the ranking was a fraud. This student was named Liu Jing, a level 13 punishment knight, ranked 38th in the standings. The professor tried to stop Liu Jing from starting a fight, explaining that it was inappropriate to challenge freshmen on the first day. However, Liu Jing ignored the warning. According to the professor himself, Zhou Yi's ranking had been unanimously approved by the director and 5 other university professors, making it nearly impossible for his first place to be fake. Still, no one tried to stop the situation. To draw even more attention, Liu Jing proposed a bet of 100 points for the match. Internally, Zhou Yi realized this was the perfect opportunity to show why he held first place. Without hesitation, he raised the bet to 300 points, which surprised Liu Jing, although it was still within what he could afford. Motivated and confident, Liu Jing accepted the challenge, which excited Zhou Yi, prompting him to ask where the duel ring was located. To make the situation even more interesting, Zhou Yi set a clear condition. If he could not end the fight in 3 moves or less, he would consider himself the loser. Sometime later, the two were already in the ring. After a 3-second countdown, Liu Jing was the first to attack. Liu Jing's class, Punishment Knight, was similar to the Paladin, but entirely focused on offense. At their core, both were hidden branches of the Knight class. Still, Liu Jing's real motive for being there was to impress the demonic girl who was watching the fight. With that in mind, he launched what he believed was his strongest attack. However, Zhou Yi simply dodged it with ease and then landed a clean strike to Liu Jing's abdomen, sending him flying a great distance. The match ended in that single move. The fight was so simple that Zhou Yi actually found it boring. Outside the ring, the supervising teacher assessed that Liu Jing had broken 5 ribs and suffered internal bleeding. Professor Su Mei commented that it would be enough to call a priest to resolve the situation. As a result of his victory, Zhou Yi received the 300 points from the bet without any problems. After this fight, the white-haired demon girl caught Zhou Yi's attention and challenged him to a duel. Before accepting, he carefully analyzed her, focusing mainly on her weapon, an ancient artifact-grade sword. Realizing this, Zhou Yi accepted the challenge, understanding that this time he would have to fight a bit more seriously. For that reason, he pulled out his massive hammer. At that moment, one of the captains of the Aurora Club, the level 29 spearman Li Dongsheng, approached and asked what was going on. However, there was no time for explanations, as the fight began instantly. The two exchanged their first blows, unleashing a massive burst of aura. Right from the start, Zhou Yi noticed that the girl's strength was monstrous. This excited him, as he had finally found someone he could truly fight against. The combat continued with constant attacks and defenses. Little by little, Zhou Yi began gaining the upper hand, forcing the girl to defend more and more. In the audience, many began questioning whether that really was a battle between students. Meanwhile, Li Dongsheng calmly analyzed the situation and concluded that although the fight seemed balanced, the girl was being increasingly pressured. At first, she defended once every 3 attacks, but now she had to defend every 2. The weight and power of Zhou Yi's hammer were taking a toll. If it continued like this, she would lose by exhaustion. Simply put, the girl was clearly struggling because of Zhou Yi's giant hammer. At one point in the battle, she was knocked several steps back. That was when Zhou Yi decided to fight seriously. He empowered himself with several buffs, releasing an overwhelming aura that made the girl instinctively back away. Next, Zhou Yi used the Spear of Victory. To avoid being hit, the girl had to use an ability called Phantom Slash. However, Zhou Yi had already anticipated this move since he knew part of her skill set. In the next instant, he raised his giant hammer and combined it with the Spear of Victory attack, leaving the girl with no chance to react. Faced with that situation, defeat was inevitable. Even though neither of them had used their full power, the outcome was already determined. The girl still had a supreme ability tied to the darkness attribute, something Zhou Yi already knew. Likewise, she also knew that Zhou Yi had not fought with full strength since she had watched the video of his previous battle in the dungeon. In any case, at the end of that fight, Zhou Yi did not just gain a victory. He also gained the contact of that beautiful girl, who asked him to add her to his ID card. The idea was to talk more in the future and perhaps have another fight. For Zhou Yi, that was an extremely pleasant surprise, as he had only come seeking a challenge and ended up finding something much more interesting. After the battle, Professor Su Mei commented that there were still more things to explain. Internally, however, she was impressed by everything she had just witnessed, which made it clear that the university year would be extremely eventful. Then, Su Mei explained about the dormitories. There were several different types. Freshmen stayed in the worst dorms, located on a small mountain. Regular students were housed at the base of the mountain, while the special recruits occupied the top. The dormitory of the special recruits was not just a simple lodging, but an isolated mansion, where the student had total freedom to do whatever they wanted. Sometime later, Zhou Yi arrived at his dormitory accompanied by Professor Su Mei. That was when she revealed an important piece of information. She said she might know where to find a freezing lotus. While Zhou Yi explored the place, Su Mei explained that the information was from years ago. A group had seen a freezing lotus in the storm ridge, but gave up on obtaining it because a high-level monster was guarding it. After revealing that, Su Mei left. Zhou Yi then went to his room and started researching the storm ridge. He discovered that the place was extremely dangerous and, in fact, had not originally been part of Earth. It was a region from the game that ended up merging with the real world when the two fused together. Even so, Zhou Yi was not overly worried because he possessed a system item that allowed him to resurrect once. Simply put, he could risk his life there without the immediate fear of permanent death. Still, Zhou Yi did not intend to go unprepared. As the top-ranked student, he had the privilege of learning all basic paladin class skills for free. With that opportunity, he acquired several abilities without spending points. In addition, with the points he earned from the bet, he decided to purchase a forest set, since his next destination would be precisely an environment of that type. Upon arriving at the storm ridge, Zhou Yi was immediately met with a massive explosion, which made him stop and carefully observe the situation. Meanwhile, on the side of the demon-blooded girl, whose name Zhou Yi only discovered at that moment, Jiangchu ran. She was quite agitated. She had sent several messages asking if they could go to the university together. The only reply she received was that Zhou Yi was leaving and heading to the storm ridge. Because of that, Jiangchu Ran contacted a friend, saying she had met a very special boy and had even tried using her charm ability on him, but it did not work. As she was not given much attention during that conversation, Jiangchu Ran decided she would also head to the storm ridge, following Zhou Yi's path. In another part of the storm ridge, the scene shifted to a group of girls driving a military vehicle while exterminating countless demons. Among them was a mechanic named Zhu Xiao, who was launching explosive mines across the battlefield, eliminating enemies in massive successive blasts. Alongside her was the summoner Wen Tian Run, who froze the demons trying to get close. The enemies trapped in ice were quickly eliminated by the shooter Zhu Dan. Those who managed to dodge the bullets were cut down by the swordswoman Su Qing Lian. Up to that point, everything seemed under control and working perfectly. However, the situation changed suddenly. The military vehicle was hit by a giant flame and was completely destroyed on impact. All of them were injured. The attack came from a large group of demons, whose numbers were overwhelming. These creatures were known for feeding on living beings, which made the situation even more desperate. Faced with that scenario, the girls already believed that death was inevitable. They had used almost all of their resources and still could not escape. When everything seemed hopeless, hopeless, a figure suddenly appeared riding a wolf. This person used an ability called Holy Storm, which not only saved the girls, but also completely obliterated the demons around them. After defeating the demons, Zhou Yi went to the girls and used his slow regeneration ability to help them recover. Qinglian thanked him for the help, and Zhou Yi replied that it was fine, since the Azure Phoenix team was considered one of the best teams at his school. Despite the calm moment, Qinglian soon warned Zhou Yi that even with the power of light, demons were still very dangerous. She also reminded him that the freshman competition was approaching and would take place in 3 days. Since Zhou Yi had not yet found what he was looking for, he would have to leave the search for the lotus until after the competition. With nothing else to do in that place, Zhu Xiao invoked an impressive spell that created a giant mechanical spider. The creature was made of metal, very well built and extremely eye-catching. As they continued their journey riding on it, Zhou Yi became thoughtful and asked whether it was normal for the Storm Mountain range to be full of demons from the beginning. Qinglian explained that the Azure Phoenix team had explored the outer area of the range many times, but this was the first time they had encountered demons in that region. Because of this, 2 possibilities emerged. Either the demons were coming from the depths of the forest, or a dimensional rift had occurred, allowing them to escape. Since this was important information, they decided they needed to report it to the army to prevent the demons from leaving the mountain range and attacking civilians. There was an army watchtower nearby, but Qinglian commented that they would probably do nothing, since the demons they encountered were considered weak. The Mage Tower, responsible for monitoring the region, usually only cared about epic or legendary level creatures that lived deeper within the range. Because the tower focused on those types of monsters, platinum or gold-ranked demons like the ones they faced were ignored. It was then that Qinglian asked an interesting question. Why would a dimensional rift only send low or mid-level demons? If the goal was destruction, sending such weak creatures would be a waste of resources, since the army could easily eliminate them. But if something stronger were sent, it would draw too much attention and alert the entire army. None of that made any sense. In addition, dealing with weaker demons made it easier to locate the origin of the rift. While they were thinking about this, outside the mechanical spider, several demons began to attack again. Zhou Yi felt a strange presence and decided to move ahead alone, promising to meet the team later. In another part of the forest, a random group was arguing about why they were not helping a girl. Despite her strength, they believed she needed protection, since she had a bright future ahead of her. The girl in question was Churon, a white-haired demon who was eliminating enemies with great skill. However, her technique had a time limit, and the demons seemed to have realized this. They continued attacking non-stop, and their numbers only increased, leaving Churon with no escape routes. At that critical moment, a massive bolt of lightning fell from the sky and destroyed all the demons around her. Churon immediately recognized that aura in the same way Zhou Yi had recognized Churon's aura earlier, which indicated that he was already close enough. However, the relief did not last long. A giant demon suddenly appeared with a terrifying roar. Unlike the others, it had a name, Fire Berserker Body. It was the one controlling the smaller demons and directing them to launch a direct assault against Churon. The situation worsened even further when Churon realized that the demons had doubled in strength, numbers, and strategy. Under that pressure, she began to think about self-destruction in an attempt to save Zhou Yi, but he did not allow it and simply held her back, preventing her from acting in desperation. This time, like a scene from a fairy tale, Zhou Yi picked Churon up in his arms, placed her on top of his wolf, since there was no horse, and ran away using the Light of Punishment, an ability that caused multiple bolts of lightning to strike all around, hitting everything along the path. Even so, some demons managed to survive, including the Fire Berserker Body, which immediately charged toward Zhou Yi. Before long, he ended up being surrounded. Zhou Yi could still handle a few enemies here and there, but there was a major problem. If he used his abilities too frequently, he would end up attracting even more demons. The situation was similar to a zombie apocalypse, where any noise attracted new hordes. Thinking of a strategy, he realized that if he could not attack freely with magic, he could instead strengthen Churon to fight by his side. With that in mind, Zhou Yi began casting multiple blessings on Churon, strengthening her as much as possible, and also applied some to himself. In the end, his choice was clear. He would face the demons in direct combat, using physical strength and technique, without relying on offensive magic. As Zhou Yi fought the demons, Churon felt something strange happening to her body. Her attributes had increased by 25%, which left her momentarily confused, since as far as she knew, only level 25 paladins could grant an increase like that. However, this was not the time to think about it. She was on a battlefield, and distractions would not save her life. Because of that, she focused entirely on the fight. During the fight, Zhou Yi was almost struck from behind, but Churon reacted quickly and saved him by using the Shadow Whip, driving the enemy away at the last moment. Observing the battlefield more carefully, Eventually, Zhou Yi noticed that many demons were gathered in a single area. Because of this, he decided to use a large-scale ability. Before activating it, he placed a strong protective barrier on Churon, knowing that the explosion would be violent. Next, Zhou Yi activated the Sacred Cross, an ability that was extremely effective against demons. Even so, many of them managed to survive. Without hesitation, he used another technique that was even more destructive, the Sacred Storm, which summoned several giant crosses that fell from the sky and exploded upon hitting the ground, destroying everything around them like a massive tornado. Despite its name, that ability was anything but subtle, as it simply devastated everything within its range. All of that explosion did not attract only the attention of the demons, but also of some humans who were nearby. They were shocked when they felt that absurd power. Many of them knew Zhou Yi and were aware that he had not yet reached level 24 or 25, which made that display even more frightening. It became clear that perhaps all of their efforts up to that point had been meaningless. Even so, they decided to approach him, since it was far better to be allied with someone like that than to be his enemy. After all the chaos, the Azure Phoenix team finally arrived at the location, making it evident just how absurdly fast Zhou Yi's wolf was. Some even wondered where he had obtained a mount of that level. In the end, after defeating countless demons, Zhou Yi reached level 18, gaining 2 levels at once. As a reward, he received 15 attribute points that he could distribute freely. Despite the victory, Zhou Yi was facing a serious problem with his mana. Although the amount he had was good for his current level, his abilities were far too advanced, and in the end, his mana was simply not enough to sustain them for long periods. Shortly afterward, Churon collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted, showing that she had spent all of her strength. Qinglian, still shocked, asked whether Zhou Yi had really eliminated all of those demons. He explained that the weaker enemies had been completely exterminated, but that the more difficult ones might still exist. Analyzing the situation more carefully, Qinglian commented that the Demon Legion, just like the humans, had a general. This indicated that the main force had not yet appeared, since the Fire Berserker body clearly did not occupy that position. In light of everything that had happened, Zhou Yi and the others concluded that the best course of action was to leave the area. Even the group that had been observing Zhou Yi agreed that retreating was the best option. However, before they could move away, everyone felt an extremely powerful demonic presence. The creature that appeared before the Azure Phoenix team, Zhou Yi and Churon, was a gigantic white dragon, and atop the dragon was an even more threatening monster. This figure was known as the Progeny, a level 30 entity belonging to the legendary class. In theory, monsters of that level were supposed to be confronted directly by the army. Speaking of the army, it did indeed receive notification of that monster's appearance. The official report stated that it was a 4th level invasion from another world, and as a result, all nearby troops were summoned to head toward the site of the emergence. The army was highly organized, consisting of various specialized squads. There were groups of priests, logistics teams, units focused on mana, attack, defense, and more. Like any military organization, there were also high-ranking commanders, and among them was the major of the Ice Dragon unit, known as Xu Yu Zhou. He quickly began a speech to raise troop morale, declaring that he would be the sword that cut through all thorns and the shield that protected the land of his nation. Meanwhile, on the demon side, there was also organization. There, the Progeny, who was in fact the general of this offensive, began to lead the assault. From Zhou Yi's side, the Progeny made typical villainous threats, claiming that it would burn everyone in the fires of hell and that no one would escape its fury. Ignoring those dramatic declarations, what truly mattered was that the Progeny had begun to summon an entire army. Legendary class demons appeared, along with gold-level warriors and platinum-level mages, forming a true demonic force before the heroes. Faced with that desperate situation, Churon stated that she would do everything she could to protect Zhou Yi, giving him a chance to escape. Facing the enemy army head-on was impossible. However, before any sacrifice could occur, the Ice Dragon unit arrived to intervene. Zhou Yi, however, was bothered by the timing of their arrival. If they had the ability to teleport, why had they taken so long to appear? The truth was that there had been a major misunderstanding. The Ice Dragon unit had been unable to teleport directly to the battlefield because the Progeny itself had prepared a magical formation that blocked all forms of teleportation in the area. In fact, the unit had been sent to a distant region. According to one of its members, the red-haired young man, breaking that barrier would require 2 complete units, and the process would take about 5 minutes. Because of this, Churon commented that the ideal course of action would be to gather information from those who were still inside the formation, so that at the very least, they could provide a proper funeral for the families if the worst were to happen. Meanwhile, Zhou Yi, still unaware that he was facing death, received a system mission for standing face-to-face with a legendary-level demon. The mission was clear: eliminate the Progeny, and as a reward, he would gain high-level talents and a rare item called Fortunate Medicine. Of course, faced with an opportunity like that, he would not hesitate. Determined to become stronger, he advanced. advanced. However, the progeny sensed the sacred energy flowing from Zhou Yi and, as a sign of contempt, declared that it would show respect by breaking all of his abilities with its own hands. Immediately after that arrogant declaration, it began to make good on its words. During the battle, the progeny used the power of the White Dragon and unleashed a massive attack. To defend himself, Zhou Yi also activated one of his abilities, which not only blocked the progeny's strike but also severed one of the dragon's wings. It was difficult to understand where such strength came from, considering that he was still only level 18. As soon as the dragon fell to the ground, Zhou Yi did not waste any time and rushed at the progeny, which tried to counterattack. However, he had already teleported and appeared right behind it. Despite the rapid movement, the strike did not hit its target, but the progeny was clearly shaken. It was hard to believe that someone at level 18 could fight on equal footing with a level 30 entity. While the progeny raged, Zhou Yi seemed calm and even commented that it was his first time facing someone of legendary level, but so far he did not see anything particularly impressive. This enraged the enemy even more, which tried to strike him again, but Zhou Yi responded by using his pure white blade, which managed to stun the opponent. Taking advantage of the opening, Zhou Yi unleashed an extremely powerful strike. The progeny tried to defend itself with a shield, but the shield ended up breaking. In desperation, the enemy began to call for reinforcements, summoning a new group of demons. At that moment, Zhou Yi raised his finger and invoked a sacred aura that shone intensely in the sky. Everyone could see it, including the soldiers of the Ice Dragon unit. A gigantic hand emerged from the clouds and struck the demonic army with such force that the shockwave was spectacular. Churon, upon witnessing that, began to tremble. Her succubus bloodline felt fear in the face of that overwhelmingly oppressive sacred energy. Meanwhile, on the other side, Shu Yu Zhou was informed that everyone present on that battlefield were students from Swang University, and that the one responsible for that monumental attack was none other than the #1 student of that year's special recruitment, the paladin Zhou Yi. Faced with that, Shu Yu Zhou was completely astonished by the level of power Zhou Yi was displaying. However, despite all of this, the progeny was still alive. Now weakened, it flew into a rage and began to summon more demons, this time with a single objective: to eliminate Zhou Yi, and for some reason, he remained standing right at the center of the battlefield, surrounded by dozens of enemies. It was at that moment that Zhou Yi realized what was happening. His mana had run out. He was without magical resources and now depended solely on his physical reserves. But fortunately, because he had exhausted all of his energy, the system activated an extremely rare ability called Divine Summoning, which could only be used once. This ability granted a buff that increased all 4 statistics by 5 points, and, in addition, multiplied health, stamina, and mana recovery by 20. It was an absurd power, a true last resort. Faced with the desperate situation, Zhou Yi activated this ability immediately. Soon after, a gigantic pillar of light descended from the sky, piercing the magical barrier that surrounded the entire battlefield. From within that pillar, a 6-winged angelic figure descended and advanced toward Zhou Yi. With its arrival, feathers fell from the sky, and the moment they touched the demons, they began to burn spontaneously. Witnessing this scene, Shu Yu Zhou immediately recognized the technique as a divine-class summoning, one of the highest abilities a paladin could use. He commented that he had once seen a level 58 priest use a similar technique, and that with a single movement, he had completely restored an entire legion. Yes, that ability was so absurdly overpowered that even the prole on the demon side began to complain, saying it was not valid and not fair. After all, how could someone at level 18 possess a technique of that level? If it continued, she knew the entire demon legion present there would be completely devastated. However, according to the prole herself, that summoning was more of a defensive ability than a direct attack. Even so, if the human side possessed such a powerful technique, the demons also had their own trump card, which in this case was the Valley of Darkness. Faced with this, the prole activated a sacrificial ability. She began consuming all the demons around her, absorbing their souls and strengthening her body in an absurd way. Meanwhile, the angelic being that had descended from the sky merely watched and commented with a certain disdain that the creature was far too ugly. Then it said that perhaps a simple flick would be enough to resolve the situation. It then asked Zhou Yi to raise his hand and declare, "Let there be light." The result was immediate and impressive. An overwhelming light descended upon the flame demon, who, after the sacrifice, had risen to level 43. Even so, he barely managed to withstand the blow, but survived. Trying to retaliate, he used an absurd technique called solar eruption, a magical explosion that generated more than 15 million cells of concentrated energy. In the prole's mind, the attack would certainly succeed, since Zhou Yi was only a paladin, a class theoretically focused on support. However, when the explosion reached Zhou Yi, it had no effect at all. The blow caused no damage. Completely shocked, the prole tried to flee, but like every classic villain, her attempt to escape was in vain. With a single movement of his hand, Zhou Yi swept away not only the prole, but also half of the surrounding landscape. The impact was so great that the few remaining demons were left terrified. However, the effort came at a cost. As soon as the divine ability dissipated, Zhou Yi collapsed, falling unconscious. His last memories before losing consciousness were of Churon holding him in her arms. A long time later, Zhou Yi woke up startled in a hospital bed, thinking that everything had been nothing more than a nightmare. But when he opened his eyes, Churon was right there in front of him. Out of nowhere, she leaned in and kissed him, which was probably enough to erase any trauma from what he had dreamed. With all the absurd advantages of the system, even waking up had become a rewarding experience. After receiving Churon's reward, Zhou Yi also received the system's reward for defeating the prole. The first prize was an S-rank talent called Death Resistance, which worked as follows. If he did not die instantly, his body would rapidly regenerate, preventing death. The second reward was a luck potion, which would drastically increase his luck for the next 12 hours. Wanting to test the new ability, Zhou Yi cut his own abdomen, and in just 2 seconds, the wound completely regenerated. He considered testing the limits of the regeneration by tearing off a leg, but decided it was better to leave that idea alone. As for the luck potion, he did not know exactly what the effects would be, and therefore chose to save it for a future situation. However, he realized that he had gained another ability, the Sacred Fire Halo. This halo strengthened all of his techniques, both support and offensive. He had already used something similar before when he shouted, "Let there be light with the angel's help," but now the ability was official. Whenever he activated the halo, his attacks would become not only sacred, but also imbued with flames. As soon as Zhou Yi left his room, he encountered a man who introduced himself as Wang Liang, the vice captain of the Snow Dragon unit. He was there to personally thank Zhou Yi for what he had done. In fact, Shu was the one who should have been there, but he had to leave to report the entire situation to his superiors. Therefore, Wang Liang had been tasked with delivering the rewards to Zhou Yi. These rewards included various skills, weapons, and other valuable items. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Zhou Yi asked if they possessed a frozen lotus, and Wang Liang confirmed that they did. It was available, but it cost 100 million points. Despite the high price, Zhou Yi purchased it immediately, which left Wang Liang somewhat shaken, since that amount was equivalent to 3 years of his salary. Even so, Wang Liang explained that he would need to retrieve the item from headquarters, which would take 2 to 3 days. He suggested that in the meantime, Zhou Yi could hunt monsters in the area to avoid getting bored. However, Zhou Yi refused, as he needed to return to his university. He had to participate in the freshman competition and could not miss it. Hearing this, Wang Liang felt a little disappointed for having forgotten that Zhou Yi was still just a student, but he accepted the decision. After that, since he had still not completed his daily missions, Zhou Yi calmly went to carry them out. Meanwhile, in the Blue Phoenix group, several girls approached Qing Lian and asked whether she intended to invite Zhou Yi to join the team. She replied that he would probably refuse, but as people say, it never hurts to ask, since she already expected a no. A short time later, Qing Lian met Zhou Yi and was straightforward, asking if he wanted to join the team. This left Zhou Yi completely confused. Even so, Qing Lian simply asked him to think about it carefully and unexpectedly kissed him on the cheek. It was similar to what Churon had done before. She explained that the gesture was a reward for him having saved her life. Things were happening far too quickly, and Zhou Yi no longer understood what was going on. He even commented to himself that girls nowadays seem much bolder. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the scene shifted to Shu, who was delivering an important report. For half a year, they had been observing the depths of the Storm Mountain range and discovered that the demons had found a way to use dimensional rifts to teleport monsters to anywhere they wished. This revelation was extremely dangerous, as it meant that attacks could occur anywhere in the world, putting all of humanity at risk. The only good news was that, for now, the portals did not allow monsters above level 30 to pass through. Although this seemed like a relief, it still represented a considerable threat. For this reason, it was decided that they needed to act as quickly as possible. Senator Yang was ordered to inform all the major legions in the country and immediately dispatch guards to all medium-level rifts. Senator Zhang, on the other hand, would participate in an international meeting to report these discoveries and observe the reactions of other countries. However, something drew a great deal of attention. The source of all this information was a boy of only 18 years old, a paladin who was holding first place among the freshmen. This was completely unexpected since, as was constantly mentioned, paladins are considered a support class. In theory, they should not reach such high positions in combat rankings. Taking advantage of the fact that the director of Sukang University was present at the meeting, he he was assigned the task of investigating information about Zhou Yi and his family. 2 days later, the story returned to Sukong Academy, where the freshman competition was scheduled to begin at 10 in the morning. The venue was already full of housemasters, who were most likely club leaders, professors, or evaluators. Among those present was a man named Wu Mang from the House of War, who began by explaining how the test would work. The competition would be divided into 2 phases. The first was the Secret Realm Challenge, where the score would depend on the chosen difficulty and the completion time. The second phase was a free challenge, in which any student could challenge another to take their position. It was straightforward and highly competitive. However, according to instructor Su Mei, neither Zhou Yi nor Churon had arrived yet. If they did not appear in time, they would lose the right to participate. She was not the only one who noticed this. Ling Feng, the red-haired young man who had appeared before, also noticed Zhou Yi's absence, which clearly worked in his favor. Despite these absences, the competition began. A portal was open, leading the participants to a silver realm divided into difficulty levels: easy, hard, infernal, nightmare, and abyssal. The last was the most dangerous of all, several times more difficult than Nightmare, and rarely chosen. However, since this was considered the strongest generation since the Academy's creation, many brave students chose the Nightmare or abyssal difficulties, which greatly impressed the instructors. Meanwhile, Wu Mang noticed that students number 001 and 003, namely Zhou Yi and Churon, still had not appeared. He then asked instructor Su Mei where they were, and she replied that they were probably just late. Wu Mang was not satisfied with the answer. According to him, because they had missed the start of the competition, the two would receive a punishment, and Su Mei should not complain afterward. But as often happens with protagonists, Zhou Yi arrived last. And it was no ordinary arrival. The moment he appeared, he went straight into the secret realm portal, choosing the abyssal difficulty without hesitation. Inside the trial field, Zhou Yi immediately activated all the buffs at his disposal, since he did not know what he would face. His first obstacle was a group of silver rank warrior bears, level 17. Despite their intimidating appearance, even resembling polar bears, they did not withstand a single strike. Meanwhile, other prominent students were also facing the same bears, using their best abilities to defeat them quickly. The instructors were impressed by the overall performance, but Wu Mang asked for the camera to switch to student number 001, as he wanted to see how Zhou Yi was doing after arriving late. When Zhou Yi appeared on the screen, it caused an immediate impact. With a single attack, he eliminated 16 bears at once and cleared the first level in 5 seconds. This left the instructors stunned. Everyone began to wonder where such absurd power came from. A strange aura could also be seen behind his back, and not even Wu Mang, with all his life experience, could identify what it was. But one thing was certain: Zhou Yi had not been idle during the past month, and his late arrival was no coincidence. On the second level, he used a skill called Divine Punishment, clearing the stage in 1 minute and 23 seconds. On the third level, he used the Spear of Victory, ending the trial almost instantly with a time of 3 minutes and 29 seconds. In total, Zhou Yi completed the entire test in 4 minutes and 57 seconds, earning an SS rating and breaking the previous record. As a reward, he received the skill Hammer of Faith, along with 25 attribute points and 25 skill points. For setting a new record, he was also rewarded with new unique talents. After completing the Abyss Secret Realm, Zhou Yi had to choose between 3 talents as a reward. The first was the Focus Halo, which increased his focus by 30%. The second was Quick Steps, which continuously increased his movement speed up to a maximum of 50%. The third was Strong Protection, which increased resistance only when he had a shield raised. Before making his choice, Zhou Yi wondered why he was receiving talents now, since he had previously completed a bronze-level dungeon and even broken the record, yet received nothing at that time. He concluded that perhaps this type of reward only became available starting from the silver level. Setting that doubt aside, he carefully analyzed the options and chose the Focus Halo. He believed that, depending on how he used this ability, it could turn the tide of battle. With greater focus, he would be able to think, act, and react faster, which would be extremely useful in high-level combat. Right after making his decision, a new portal appeared before him. It was a bonus stage, unlocked by completing the most difficult secret realm. Since it was well known that the risks inside dungeons were high, but so were the rewards, Zhou Yi accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, on the instructor's side, everyone was discussing Zhou Yi's information, his abilities, and which house he should be recommended to. Within the academy, each house functioned like a specialized club, such as the House of War, the Elemental House, and and others. This was an important decision, and it was not only the housemasters present. Even the academy director appeared to take part in the discussion, which greatly surprised the others. Back in the bonus stage, Zhou Yi encountered a creature connected to what were known as evil gods. Just as there are benevolent gods, there are also evil ones. The difference is that while good gods grant power to those who have faith in them, evil gods demand sacrifices in return, such as life and soul. When the world merged with the game, there were initially people who worshipped these evil gods. However, after an incident in which an individual sacrificed an entire city of millions of people to gain power from one of these gods, humanity completely banned any form of evil cult. The problem was that humans were not the only ones living on Earth. There were also beastmen, elves, and even angels, and some of them still worshipped evil gods, which remained a major threat. Zhou Yi's opponent in that stage was a monster bear ghost, a type of summon linked to the evil god Lord Exia. This bear was the boss of the bonus stage, and being a ghost, it was immune to physical attacks. This posed a major problem for martial artists who relied on brute force, but that was not the case for Zhou Yi. Without hesitation, he activated his divine aura and unleashed a powerful attack that almost instantly defeated the creature. However, the bear revived soon after, claiming that it was immortal thanks to the power of Lord Exia. It began to mock Zhou Yi, saying that his trump card had been wasted, that any effort from that point on would be useless, and that it could revive infinitely. Even so, Zhou Yi was not intimidated. He wanted to test whether that immortality was truly infinite. To do so, he activated one of his greatest powers, the Divine Hand. And yes, the attack destroyed the bear once again, but to his surprise, it revived again, proving that the curse truly allowed unlimited rebirths. To be absolutely certain, Zhou Yi used the Divine Hand technique several times. That was the end of the discussion. After killing the same monster 10 times in a row, he completed the challenge of that place, as the bear's revival system finally ended. As a reward, Zhou Yi reached level 19 and received an item called the Golden Rank Bear Horn. However, the function of this item was not explained. From the beginning, Zhou Yi had already suspected that killing the monster multiple times would work. As soon as he arrived at that place, he felt a malicious energy that he recognized as belonging to an evil god. When the bear appeared, he noticed a strange movement coming from the direction of that energy. Each time he defeated the bear, the malicious energy weakened. In other words, he understood that the secret was to keep destroying the bear until the influence of that energy was completely exhausted. There was nothing truly infinite about it. It was simply a matter of persistence. Meanwhile, Shen Lingfeng was struggling against the same bear because, as had already been said, the monster had an absurd resistance to physical attacks. Even so, Shen Lingfeng managed to defeat it 8 times and was confident that he would take first place. On the side of the house, masters, and the director, everyone was confused. That was because the ability used by Zhou Yi was an S-rank skill, which made no sense for a student who had just reached level 19. They began to wonder where he had obtained something so powerful until the director asked everyone to remain silent, making it clear that he was covering for Zhou Yi. In addition, the level 19 achieved by Zhou Yi was already frightening the instructors, but the director knew that he had gone to the Storm Mountains and achieved great feats there. After all, Zhou Yi had enough power to annihilate an entire army of flaming demons on his own. Because of that, the competition should not even have caught his interest, if not for the issue of resource allocation. In the end, he still had to participate. Soon after, Shen Lingfeng appeared and saw Zhou Yi. He immediately became furious because he was certain he would take first place. He was so confident that he thought Zhou Yi had given up, which was why he had arrived earlier, but reality was very different. Ignoring that, suddenly a person fell from the sky, and Zhou Yi naturally helped. Shortly after, other students also began to fall, and the instructors had to rush to assist the injured. Because of this, there was a time skip of 1 hour, and the first phase of the freshman competition officially came to an end. As soon as the scoreboard appeared, Shen Lingfeng realized that he had not placed first. Enraged, he climbed onto a pillar and declared that he would challenge Zhou Yi to a duel in the second phase. Regarding this second phase, Wumong explained that everyone would have 3 challenge opportunities, with a 5-minute interval between each fight. As soon as the new phase began, the first to shout was Shen Lingfeng, calling out Zhou Yi to fight. He wanted to prove that he was the strongest there. He was clearly suffering from the classic overpowered protagonist syndrome. Since Zhou Yi did not know who he was, Churon explained, Shen Lingfeng had placed second and came from an important family in the city of Jiangning. In addition, he possessed a rare bloodline, that of the fire dragon. Even with this information, Zhou Yi accepted the challenge without hesitation, because he wanted to show Shen Lingfeng why he was in first place. However, in Shen Lingfeng's mind, he still believed himself superior. He began to summon firepower and charged at Zhou Yi, but his attack had no effect because of the initial blessing, an ability called Divine Protection. Because of this, Shen Lingfeng realized that his basic attacks did not work against Zhou Yi. Then Zhou Yi himself explained that he only needed 0.1 seconds to activate his protection, which made any surprise attack impossible to succeed against him. Since Zhou Yi was in a hurry, he did not waste time and charged forward with a single strike that shattered Shen Lingfeng's protective ability. Shen Lingfeng even tried to flee, but Zhou Yi did not allow it. On the second attack, Shen Lingfeng finally took the fight seriously. He activated his Fire Dragon Bloodline, fully awakening his power. As a result, his body began to show dragon traits, taking on a half-human, half-draconic appearance, very similar to Churon's. In general, any cultivator who awakens their bloodline begins to manifest physical traits linked to the origin of that bloodline. Upon seeing this, for some reason, Zhou Yi felt a slight sense of envy. He then launched a third attack, far stronger than the previous ones, yet Shen Lingfeng still managed to dodge it. At that moment, Shen Lingfeng began to declare that his body was not limited to close combat alone. Since his bloodline was that of a dragon, he could also breathe fire from his mouth. The problem was that this did not work against Zhou Yi. As soon as Zhou Yi activated his sacred fire halo, Shen Lingfeng's attack simply vanished. To his eyes, Zhou Yi looked like a majestic figure, as if he were a king, while he himself was nothing more than a minister. Even so, with his pride wounded and dominated by protagonist syndrome, Shen Lingfeng insisted on attacking with even more fire. But it was useless. Since Zhou Yi had already proven that flames did not work against him, he decided to return the attack with even greater intensity. Shen Lingfeng tried to resist and declared that he would give everything he had to defend against that strike, but it was not enough. He was hurled to the other side of the arena and fell unconscious. With that, Zhou Yi won the battle decisively. The audience was stunned and began to wonder how Zhou Yi could be so strong and well-balanced. After all, he had risen 5 levels in just 1 month, something that defied all logic. While everyone was still processing the fight, a new participant stepped onto the stage. It was Song Xiaolan, a level 17 spiritual Taoist priestess. She asked to face Zhou Yi. This Taoist priestess class was unique to China and possessed special enchantment and sealing abilities. This was important because if Zhou Yi had not found the Frozen Lotus, they would need someone like her to seal the dragon inside Yuan. Among the audience, people were excited. Song Xiaolan declared that she would use all of her power. She looked determined. Zhou Yi replied that if she wanted to fight that badly, then he would also fight with everything he had. With that, he began applying blessings to himself. There were so many blessings that he quickly summoned an armor and several other enhancements. Seeing this, Song Xiaolan decided that she also needed to take the fight seriously. The battle began with Zhou Yi launching his first attack, a blow so strong that she would not be able to withstand it normally. Because of that, she used a teleportation skill. Even so, it did not help. Zhou Yi predicted her movement and landed a powerful kick, which she managed to block at the last moment. Unwilling to continue only defending, Song Xiaolan threw something onto the ground and began summoning strange creatures. It was a bean soldier transmutation technique, a type of mysterious ability. Despite the curious name, these soldiers were not weak. Zhou Yi attacked them and was even able to destroy them, but they came back as if they were immortal. They had the same regeneration as the ghost bear from the previous stage. As the pattern repeated itself, Zhou Yi understood that he needed to find the source of the power sustaining that infinite regeneration. It was clear that the source was Song Xiaolan. Because of that, he rushed toward her at an absurd speed, giving her barely any time to react. She only raised her hand and declared that she surrendered. This was a bit disappointing for Zhou Yi, as he had hoped she would fight with everything she had. However, she tried to justify herself, saying that her level was much lower. In addition to that, she still needed to use her remaining attempts on other people, otherwise she would end up losing many points. Leaving that aside, since this was already the second attempt of our protagonist, he asked who would be the next to challenge him. However, after 2 overwhelming victories, no one else wanted to fight him. Faced with this situation, on the teacher's side, some were already commenting that, based on what was happening there, Zhou Yi would certainly be contested by the masters of the houses. As a side note, the poor Ling Feng was being brutally beaten by Wang Li, who kept apologizing while saying that he needed to do it. Internally, Ling Feng was furious, as he had fallen from 10th to 16th place. He blamed himself for the defeat, telling himself that he was only losing because he was weak, and with absolute certainty, once he became strong, he promised that he would crush everyone. Summarizing the results, half an hour later, first place went to our protagonist, Zhou Yi. Second place went to Churon, and third place to Xiaolan. Since the second phase had officially ended, it was time for the so-called house assignment session. And now they would finally explain what that meant. Simply put, because the world was filled with monsters, chaos, and all kinds of threats, the houses were created to organize students into areas that could directly contribute to the nation and to humanity in the future. The first house, called the House of War, focused on training students to face the extremes and cruelty of the world. The Elemental House mainly recruited people with powers tied to natural elements. There was also the House of Armament, which focused exclusively on weapons, seeking to extract their full potential while ignoring magical skills or techniques. The Tactical class, in turn, aimed to train strategic students capable of commanding large-scale operations and battles. Finally, the House of Logistics handled all organization, planning, and resources, being essential to the functioning of any operation, even if it was the least flashy of all. After these explanations, Churon directly asked Zhou Yi which house he would choose. However, he did not even have time to answer. Wu Meng, who was a master of one of the houses, quickly stepped forward and asked whether Zhou Yi would be interested in joining his house. If he accepted, Wu Meng himself would become Zhou Yi's personal mentor. According to the academy rules, a professor could train only one elite student. As an incentive, he also offered 3 A-rank skill books, along with resources of the same level. Soon after, the master of the Elemental House appeared, which did not make much sense, since Zhou Yi's power was divine rather than elemental. Even so, he also wanted to recruit him. Finally, the last professor to make an offer was the master of the House of Armament, who offered a complete set of legendary equipment and other benefits. The dispute among the 3 masters intensified and drew everyone's attention, as the 3 main houses were competing to recruit a single person. This caused envy throughout the entire audience. However, the most impressive moment came right after that. The academy director himself intervened and asked Zhou Yi to become his personal disciple. As a condition, the director stated that he would create a unique bloodline technique for Zhou Yi, which obviously sounded extremely appealing. Curious, Zhou Yi asked what it was about. In short, the explanation was simple. This bloodline technique would be created exclusively for him, tailored to his power, talent, and potential. In this case, it was a unique bloodline made specifically for him. This bloodline not only increased Zhou Yi's attributes, but also granted extra points every time he leveled up. It was clearly an absurd advantage. A bloodline system was truly something powerful, so it was no surprise that everyone began to feel envious of him. Even Ling Feng felt it. According to him, if Zhou Yi had not been in first place, the chosen one would have been himself. The logic was a bit broken there, but that was what he believed. Returning to the director's side, he was not there only to recruit Zhou Yi. In fact, there was something he needed to deliver. It was a reward sent at the request of the captain of the Snow Dragon Legion. According to Ling Feng, that item was a golden medal, something extremely rare. Not even the Shen family, one of the 8 great families of Ningguian, possessed one of these. To give an idea, even Churon's grandfather, who had fought for many years on the front lines, had only managed to obtain a silver medal. Because of this, Zhou Yi was completely confused, unable to understand what was going on. The director simply said that he was aware of Zhou Yi's actions in the Storm Valley, and that the medal was a well-deserved reward. Even without fully understanding, Zhou Yi accepted the medal, since it was recognition of merit. And, of course, he also accepted becoming the director's disciple. As soon as he confirmed it, the director immediately said that it was already time to leave, showing a certain fear that the other masters might still try to take Zhou Yi into their houses. With his departure, the focus shifted to Churon. A large number of professors went straight to her side, and once again, a dispute began among the masters to see who had managed to recruit her. Meanwhile, Zhou Yi was taken to a place filled with flasks and potions all around. At first glance, it looked like a laboratory, but in reality, it was the director's mansion. According to him, that was where he carried out his experiments and stored valuable items. Therefore, if Zhou Yi ever wanted to find him, he just needed to go to that mansion. Returning to the topic of bloodlines, the director began to explain that the process of creating a bloodline would cause Zhou Yi's current bloodline to undergo a qualitative transformation. For that, a forbidden spell would be used, and it would only work properly if something called a blood heart was used at the source of the metamorphosis. Otherwise, the result could be disastrous for him. The reason for the existence of this spell was simple. The potential of an ordinary human bloodline was very low. Even if it worked well at the beginning, it reached a very clear limit at higher levels. When that happened, the person had extreme difficulty continuing to evolve. That was why those who possessed a bloodline gained extra points with each level, which helped a lot. After all, the higher the level, the more absurd the amount of experience required to advance. For example, the director himself, who was at level 64, needed to face several powerful bosses just to gain a small amount of experience. Even with so much power, progress was slow. Knowing this, the director prepared 3 bloodlines for Zhou Yi to choose from. The first was from the angel race, the second from the titans, and the third from the dragons. All of them were divine bloodlines of an extremely high level. If he chose the angel bloodline, he would have an extremely high affinity with the light element, and any ability related to that element would be strengthened. The titan bloodline offered a direct connection with the god of thunder, which enhanced all lightning-based abilities. Finally, the dragon bloodline granted Zhou Yi a natural pressure over other bestial races, causing them to instinctively feel intimidated in his presence. Upon hearing about these 3 bloodlines, Zhou Yi was completely shaken, as all of them were extremely rare and normally only available to people above level 60. Since Zhou Yi did not want to be greedy and also did not know much about the world, even though he had a system, he asked the director to choose one of the bloodlines for him. This attitude surprised and pleased the director, since young people were usually greedy and would impulsively choose any powerful bloodline. Observing carefully, it was clear that the most suitable bloodline for Zhou Yi was the angel bloodline, as most of his abilities had some connection to the light element. However, since creating a bloodline took time, the director warned that the process would only be carried out the following day. Before leaving, Zhou Yi also took the opportunity to ask why he had received a golden medal. Since it did not make sense to him, the director explained that although Zhou Yi did not understand it at that moment, his actions in the Storm Mountains had revealed a dangerous plan of the demons. They discovered that the demons were capable of controlling portals and opening them anywhere they wanted, which was extremely worrying. The good news was that these portals could only reach medium-sized rifts, so the Alliance forces prepared to attack them before they could cause greater problems. This information was shared with other regions and also resulted in several missions being opened, allowing Zhou Yi to have new opportunities to become stronger. And one important note, the director revealed that Zhou Yi was not his only disciple. He already had 4 other students, making Zhou Yi his 5th direct disciple. After all the explanations, the director handed Zhou Yi a special cubicle that could be activated to teleport him directly to the mansion. That was where the bloodline creation would take place. The next day, after completing his daily training, Zhou Yi decided to prepare with the utmost care. He drank a luck potion, since there was a risk that the bloodline creation could fail. Taking advantage of the fact that he had not yet chosen the reward for his daily mission, he selected a random chest. To his surprise, he obtained an S-rank item, a longling fruit extracted from the body of a dragon, which drastically increased physical constitution. In short, the item was ridiculously overpowered. Because the effect of the luck potion was time-limited, Zhou Yi quickly teleported to the director's mansion. There, he ended up encountering the master of the elemental house, who was questioning the director about why he was offering a bloodline as rare as the angel bloodline to a student like Zhou Yi. The director calmly replied that he had kept that bloodline stored for a long time, and that he had chosen Zhou Yi as the one who deserved it. Taking advantage of everyone's presence, the director asked Zhou Yi to step into the magic circle, remove his clothes, and prepare for the start of the ritual. The master of the elemental house would be responsible for conducting the bloodline creation technique, while the director would prepare the protective barrier around them, since any interruption could ruin everything. As soon as the ritual began, and the angel's blood was inserted into Zhou Yi's body, an intense blue aura suddenly emerged. A gigantic pillar of light burst toward the sky. According to the master of the elemental house, this could only mean one thing. Zhou Yi already possessed a special bloodline within himself, and when you stop to think about it, it made sense. If his sister had a rare bloodline, why would he not have one as well? With that absurd amount of ice aura surrounding him, the master of the elemental house began to reflect on the situation. He realized that if Zhou Yi were an ice mage, with that aura, he could become the greatest ice mage in history. At the same time, the director was almost certain that Zhou Yi possessed an awakened bloodline. That made sense, since his sister also had a bloodline, something that had already been mentioned before. Even so, the director suspected that the angelic bloodline would end up suppressing the ice bloodline, since the angelic one was of an extremely high level. However, what happened was something completely unexpected. Zhou Yi bloodline was so strong that it managed to balance itself with the angelic bloodline, which by itself was already impressive. This was explained by the fact that almost all non-human bloodlines of current humanity came from the first players of the game, Eternal. When those players merged with reality, they became absurdly strong. This meant that Zhou Yi ancestor was one of the first people to play Eternal. Because of that, instead of the ice bloodline disappearing upon coming into contact with the angelic bloodline, the two began to balance each other, and little by little, the angelic bloodline started to lose its advantage. If that process continued, the effects inside Zhou Yi body would be similar to those of someone who had consumed a high-level potion. From that point on, however, he would need to remain completely completely alone, since everything would depend on sheer luck. A single mistake could cause his body to simply explode. Meanwhile, on Joy Yi's side, something unexpected happened. He was suddenly taken to a kind of mental realm. There, he encountered a woman with an intriguing appearance who quickly approached him. She claimed to be there on behalf of God and said that she was considered a blessing sent to him. According to her, Joy Yi's true strength would be released if he accepted that offer. Faced with that situation, Joy Yi began to find everything very strange. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, telling him that he should attack that woman without hesitation. At the moment she came even closer, he followed his instincts and delivered a violent blow, sending her flying away, completely disoriented. At the same time, in the heavens, a goddess observed the scene and began to laugh unexpectedly, even leaving the angel beside her confused. She merely commented that she had just seen something very funny, and that she had already expected something like that from the protagonist. Back in Joy Yi's mental realm, the woman was consumed by fury and declared that God would certainly cast a divine punishment upon him. Joy Yi, however, remained calm and stated that that made no sense, because he knew that woman was not sent by God, and he was right. Soon after, the woman summoned several chains that bound him and declared that this would be the consequence for disrespecting Master Exia. Even while restrained, Joy Yi was not intimidated and stated that she was nothing more than a servant of an evil god. The woman did not care about the insults. According to her, Joy Yi had attracted the attention of her master, and that was why she had been sent to perform a baptism on him. It became clear that Exia was not a benevolent god. A malignant aura began to surround Joy Yi's body. That was not just energy, but corrupted thoughts that started to affect his mind. As a result, he began to lose control, and this madness crossed the mental realm and reached reality, frightening the two teachers who were observing the situation. The director tried to help his student, but nothing seemed to work, until the moment when everything changed. Instead of Joy Yi losing strength, he began to gain even more power. His two bloodlines started working together, and he ended up assuming an almost sacred form, wielding a gigantic ice hammer. And it was exactly at that point that everyone knew what would happen. Whenever Joy Yi held that hammer, he would simply go on destroying everything in his path. After knocking the woman down with a single brutal blow, something even more serious happened. Using the body of that priestess, the evil god ended up being partially invoked. The presence that emerged was clearly linked to Exia, and at that moment, there were no more doubts that it was an extremely dangerous being. The priestess, now functioning as a channel for the demon god, began to launch more and more chains toward Joy Yi. He, however, remained still for a moment, and then his body disappeared. What remained behind was only an ice clone. Shortly after, Joy Yi appeared behind the gigantic demon and opened a colossal ice portal, from which enormous spikes emerged and pierced the creature body. The demon reacted quickly, using its own power to try to absorb the energy of the spikes. It stated that human beings did not possess the true power of God, only remnants of it. Unlike the priestess, who for being an extremely devoted follower of Master Exia, acted as a direct channel of malignant divine power and therefore wielded a force considered true. After that declaration, the entity began an incessant sequence of attacks. Chains were launched non-stop, and soon after a gigantic purple energy cannon appeared. The attack was only contained when Joy Yi raised an enormous shield to defend himself. Shortly afterward, Joy Yi Ice Wings began to transform, taking on an angelic form. He dodged several consecutive attacks and, with a single decisive movement, released a massive explosion of light. That light was so intense that it seemed to affect everything around it, not only demons, but any being present. When the brightness finally dissipated, there were no more doubts. The creature had been completely exterminated. After the battle ended, Joy Yi realized that his ice bloodline had fused with the angelic bloodline. At the very moment he returned to reality, a different light appeared outside. The goddess of light herself descended and granted her blessing directly to Joy Yi bloodline, making it clear that he had been recognized by the heavens. Faced with this, the director quickly approached to check Joy Yi's condition. He analyzed the situation and concluded that Joy Yi's power had increased significantly in quality. When Joy Yi checked the system, he confirmed the change. He had obtained a special six-winged angel bloodline, a fusion between the angelic bloodline and the ice bloodline. This new bloodline possessed absurd potential. As it evolved, Joy Yi could even control other elements, besides light and ice. In addition, the bloodline had a passive ability of magic immunity. At the moment, this immunity was still weak, but it would become increasingly powerful as he leveled up. According to the director, the six-winged angel bloodline was the highest among all angelic bloodlines. Because of that, when Joy Yi evolved enough, he would certainly awaken S+ rank abilities. During the conversation, Joy Yi also revealed that he already possessed a skill called Angel Physique. This technique functioned as an extremely powerful armor, allowing him to transform into an angel, just like other Bloodline users did. However, since he had not yet fully absorbed his Bloodline and his level was low, using this ability caused great physical strain. To use it without side effects, he would need to reach at least level 50. Even so, the director decided to test the technique and asked Joy Yi to activate it. The instant he did, Joy Yi transformed into a gigantic angel enveloped by an absurd amount of aura, to the point that it was barely possible to see his form. That appearance was very similar to the form he had assumed in the mental world, with the exception of the former blue wings. After the transformation, the director confirmed that Joy Yi power had increased by about 5 times. His body overflowed with energy, and the elements of light and ice, which were part of his bloodline, were under absolute control. Controlling that power was as natural as breathing. The problem was that Joy Yi elemental energy was so intense that the defense system of the Director Mansion was automatically activated. The director explained that Joy Yi could control elemental power naturally because elemental energy was the most compatible with angels. Even so, he warned that it would be better to turn that power off immediately, otherwise the mansion-owned system might attack him. The moment Joy Yi turned the power off, even though he had remained transformed for only a few seconds, he felt intense pain spread throughout his body. That made sense, because according to the director, the six-winged angel bloodline was far too strong for his current body. That transformation, therefore, should be treated as a trump card, something to be used only in extreme situations. Faced with this, the master of the elemental house commented that the other freshmen were practically doomed to live in Joy Yi's shadow. With 2 S+ rank abilities, it would be practically impossible for anyone to face him head-on. Then, the director shifted the focus of the conversation and commented that if Joy Yi bloodline was that powerful, his sister bloodline was probably the same. Because of that, instead of using only the frozen lotus directly, the ideal approach would be to create a pill using the lotus as the main ingredient, ensuring a much safer result. For that, some additional ingredients would be necessary, but nothing that the university points could not solve. Since Joy Yi had already finished everything he needed to do in that place, he said his goodbyes and left. After his departure, the master of the elemental house began to reflect on a worrying detail. An evil god energy had appeared during Joy Yi ritual. If the goddess of light had not interfered, the result could have been a catastrophe capable of affecting not only the university, but the entire country. Faced with this, the director stated that he would investigate the incident thoroughly. Meanwhile, Joy Yi continued on his way, thinking about how he would create the pill for his sister. He knew he would need some rare ingredients, and one of them was frozen grass, a high-level treasure. Even so, this was not a problem, because with points, it was possible to buy practically anything, and Joy Yi had plenty of them for being ranked first among the freshmen. At that moment, someone appeared at his door. It was Professor Sume. As soon as she saw him, she immediately noticed that Joy Yi had become stronger. In addition, there was something different about him, a more noble and imposing presence. Sume explained that she was there to deliver the resources that the director had authorized, coming from the House of War. That seemed strange to Joy Yi, since he had chosen the director, not the House of War. Sume then explained that the most special resources came directly from the director, while the basic resources were provided by the House of War. What truly confused Joy Yi was the fact that Sume was associated with the House of War, even though she was an elemental mage. When he questioned this, she simply returned the question, saying that there was no reason for her not to be there. Without insisting on the matter, Sume presented the basic resources that Joy Yi could choose at that moment. Among the available items, to his surprise, was exactly the frozen grass he needed. That was not just a coincidence. The luck potion he had used earlier was still active, which explained that sequence of favorable events. After finishing the negotiations, Sume completely changed her tone and scolded Joy Yi. She made it clear that she knew how strong he was, but she did not understand why he had gone so deep into the Storm Mountain. She spoke at length, but the main point was simple. She was worried. Geniuses like Joy Yi appeared frequently, but few managed to survive until the end. Joy Yi showed that he understood her concern. Taking advantage of the topic, he asked whether Sume knew of any safe method to further increase his strength while also allowing him to gain real combat experience. Sometime later, Joy Yi was being analyzed by several drones, while Sume explained how the place worked. It was basically a combat simulation. There was indeed a certain degree of real danger, but nothing capable of killing him. The simulation had several difficulty levels, and Sume recommended that he start with the lowest one. She made it clear that exaggerating right from the start would be a terrible idea, and that it could end very badly. After giving all the explanations, Sume said goodbye, as she needed to teach a class. Before leaving, she reinforced once again that he should not overdo the tests. However, Joy Yi simply ignored the warning. He acted like someone who did not take advice seriously. Instead of choosing level 1 to understand how the simulation worked, he jumped straight to level 7. This caused a large number of combat robots to be immediately summoned to face him. According to the simulation system, would face 50 mobilized training robots. As soon as the battle began, he almost took a shot directly to the face. Gradually, however, he managed to adapt, dodging the bullets, while observing the attack patterns. Since the objective there was training, the first thing he did was test the power of the ice concentrated in his own fist. With that, Yi managed to destroy a robot with a single punch and even deflected a bullet using his fist reinforced by ice. From that point on, he realized that this ability was extremely useful. To test it even further, he unleashed a gigantic ice storm. In just a few moments, all the robots around him were frozen and then shattered in a single explosion. Against all expectations, Yi cleared level 7 on the very first attempt. From that, he concluded that ice power was excellent for area control. Curious about his own limits, he decided to test level 10, which was the maximum allowed in that simulation. When he made the request, the control orb explained that many robots had been destroyed. Because of that, level 10 would need to be adapted. The simulation then created a supernatural ranked training robot, equivalent to a level 25 enemy. In addition, that robot possessed enhanced intelligence, being capable of devising both offensive and defensive strategies. The system warned Yi to be careful and informed him that he could end the test at any time. Even so, Yi did not retreat. As soon as the combat began, the robot used ice elemental power, froze Yi's legs, and tried to hit him with a direct strike. However, the attack only hit an ice clone. Yi tried to disarm the robot right after that, but failed. The robot dodged with precision and, using the power of light, managed to disarm Yi himself. It became clear that the robot was copying Yi's abilities and using everything against him. The imitation was so precise that the robot's next attack was exactly the same as the last attack Yi had used. He managed to defend himself, but soon noticed another problem. A piece of the destroyed robot on the ground was transformed by the system into a storm wolf. That completely caught Yi by surprise. Faced with that situation, he realized that fighting directly would not be the best option. Instead, he activated his trump card. He used the angelic physique, an ability that likely could not be copied by the robot. Meanwhile, in another location, Churon was in a good mood. She had become a personal disciple of Master Song and, as a consequence, received a large amount of rare resources, in addition to advancing in her cultivation. Excited, she decided to test her new level of strength. However, she was unable to enter the training area that day. Many robots had been destroyed, and the system required maintenance. Because of that, Churon would have to return the next day, something that drew attention, since most freshmen could barely reach level 6 of the simulation. According to what the computer displayed, someone was inside the level 10 area. This made Churon start to suspect something, because it made no sense at all. Not even Yi should be able to withstand a difficulty level of that degree. Meanwhile, on Yi's side, the situation was already resolved. He advanced while flying and used a sacred chain. That ability was not originally his, as it had been copied from the older woman he encountered in his mental world. Now, it was he who was copying techniques. Using that sacred chain, Yi managed not only to destroy the wolf robot, but also to completely paralyze the giant robot. In addition, he possessed an extremely rare ability that allowed him to detect the enemy weakness. In the case of the robot, the weak point was the concentration of energy located right in the center of the chest. Taking advantage of the robot immobilized state, Yi delivered a single punch, which was enough to cause fatal damage. Even so, the robot was not defeated easily. It activated a self-destruction protocol, causing a gigantic explosion. Churon, who still did not fully understand what had happened, received a message from the system informing her that she should only return after 1 week, since all the robots in that sector had been damaged. Upon realizing that level 10 had been completed, Churon tried to understand who had done it. Taking a few steps forward, she finally noticed Yi. He, in turn, was complaining internally for not having anticipated the Stormwolf surprise attack and was already beginning to consider the idea of hiring a beast as a companion. Interrupting his thoughts, Churon approached and noticed how much stronger Yi had become. After analyzing the situation, she confirmed the creation of his bloodline had already been completed. Yi's bloodline was that of a 6-winged angel, something extremely rare. In comparison, Churon bloodline, which was that of a common succubus, was far inferior in terms of value and potential. Taking advantage of Churon being present, Yi asked her to take him to the magical pet market, since she knew the school better. Sometime later, they arrived at the market, which was crowded with people negotiating, selling, and advertising magical creatures looking more like a large and lively fair. Zhou goal was to obtain a magical pet, and he was specifically thinking about a storm wolf. In the past, he had already tamed a similar wolf, but he had not been able to form a definitive contract. Because of that, he now needed another one. The moment he mentioned the storm wolf, a seller named Liu Ji appeared. He belonged to the House of Logistics. According to Churon, that meant the pets sold by him usually had good origins. Liu Ji offered a silver rank storm wolf. Zhou Yi did not like the rank very much, but he considered the price acceptable since it cost only 60 points. The wolf had a beautiful appearance, but Churon noticed that it seemed weak and poorly fed. Liu Ji insisted that he had taken good care of the cub, but Zhou Yi did not care. To him, there were no useless magical pets, only useless masters. Without wasting time, Liu Ji handed over the contract and asked for the 60 points. Zhou Yi transferred the amount immediately. In Liu Ji's mind, it was just a profitable sale, since he believed he was getting rid of the weakest pet he owned by selling it to a newcomer. However, the moment Zhou Yi completed the contract, the truth was revealed. The Storm Wolf was not silver rank, but legendary rank. Its real value was around 1,000 points, and Zhou Yi had managed to buy it for only 60. This happened thanks to the effect of the luck potion he had used earlier. Because of that, Churon began to praise Zhou Yi, while Liu Ji fell into complete despair upon realizing that he had sold a legendary pet for a ridiculously low price. Finally, it was time to give the pet a name. Zhou Yi simply called it Gray because of its gray color. While Gray calmly settled in Churon's arms, Liu Ji continued to complain, realizing too late that he had made an absurd mistake when setting that price. As the situation spread, even other vendors in the market began to comment that Liu Ji should return the money. Since that would involve breaking the contract, Liu Ji tried to negotiate, offering a refund of up to 300 points to Zhou Yi. However, Zhou Yi refused without hesitation, since it made no sense to buy something legally and then have the seller suddenly want the item back. To ensure that Liu Ji would not cause trouble in the future, Zhou Yi released a small portion of his aura as a display of power. That pressure was enough to frighten Liu Ji, who began to tremble instantly. After that brief demonstration, Zhou Yi lost interest in staying there and left together with Churon and his new pet. As Zhou Yi walked away, some people around began to recognize him. Many commented that Liu Ji had an older brother and that if he found out what had happened, he would probably go after Zhou Yi to settle the matter. Interestingly, that brother really did appear shortly afterward. However, instead of helping, he ended up hitting Liu Ji himself, scolding him for not understanding the significance of a freshman receiving a golden medal. Faced with that, Liu Ji was completely confused, unable to understand what he had done so wrong. Meanwhile, already on the way home, Zhou Yi played with Gray and noticed that the cub was already able to control the power of wind, even at such a young age. In addition, since the effect of the luck potion was still active, the Order of the Freezing Lotus arrived much faster than expected. As soon as he received the Freezing Lotus, Zhou Yi analyzed the item and confirmed that its quality was truly excellent. Without wasting time, he decided to prepare a pill using that material. However, since it was an S-rank pill, he could not produce it on his own. It was necessary to follow the proper procedures and request its creation directly from the pill hall. Therefore, Zhou Yi went to the pill hall and asked for Master He Tian, since he wanted to commission a pill. The master's disciple, named Lin Yi, informed him that He Tian was in a meeting at the moment and that she could help if he had any questions. The instant Zhou Yi explained that he needed to produce an S-rank ice pill, Lin Yi became suspicious, as that did not seem like something a freshman would normally be able to obtain. She wondered how Zhou Yi possessed so many rare treasures. Given the rarity of the request, Lin Yi informed him that she would charge 800 points for her master to produce the pill. Zhou Yi accepted without arguing and completed the order. After that, he headed to class, since he was still a university student. In the corridors, Zhou Yi noticed that many students were talking about the absurd number of portals that were opening all over the country. That confirmed his suspicions that the demons had indeed found a way to control the portals. In the middle of those thoughts, Xialan appeared and commented that she was also part of the same class as Zhou Yi, since her personal mentor was Wu Mong. Since they would be classmates, she asked him to take good care of her. Shortly after, Sume appeared, introducing herself as the teacher in charge of the class. Before starting the lesson, she made an important announcement about the rumors involving the appearance of monsters in several regions of the country. Although those creatures were not extremely strong, the government was treating the situation very seriously. Because of that, the government decided to increase by 70% the resources allocated to the students of Sukang University, as it needed to train stronger combatants for the future. In addition, the Three Realms Abyss mode would be open. To enter this mode, an Abyss Stone would still be required, but even so, it represented a great opportunity for growth for the students. Before the students became too excited, Sume made it clear that despite the increase in resources, the most important thing was still for everyone to focus on becoming stronger and evolving constantly. Speaking of becoming stronger, Joey noticed that Sume herself was also much more powerful compared to their first meeting. After the announcement, the class finally began, but that content was not relevant at the moment, so time passed quickly. When the classes ended, the students began to talk excitedly about the abyss dungeons they had faced. One of them had tried the nightmare difficulty and ended up failing, losing points in the process. Upon hearing that, Joey remembered that he no longer needed to go to Storm Mountain since he no longer needed the Freezing Lotus. In addition, that place was extremely dangerous. For that reason, he decided it would be better to go to the Goblin dungeon. Since his goal was to level up as fast as possible, Joey intended to challenge the dungeon directly on abyss difficulty. However, his thoughts were interrupted when someone approached him. Churon appeared in front of him with a slight smile, commenting that she knew the rewards of the school's 3 realms abyss had increased several times. Because of that, she wanted to form a team with Joey so they could grow together. Without hesitation, he agreed. However, when they arrived in front of the dungeon portal, Joey informed her that he intended to enter on abyss difficulty. That made Churon hesitate, since she could not endure that level of difficulty. As a result, she decided she would only enter on hard difficulty. Joey found it a pity, but explained that he would first go once on abyss difficulty and then accompany Churon on hard difficulty since the two of them intended to hunt together. Upon hearing that, Churon became excited again and headed to her own entrance. Meanwhile, a commotion caught the attention of everyone around. Someone began shouting that a student from the Earth ranking was about to enter a dungeon, something extremely rare. The student in question was Shiming Xuan, a class 23 mage classified in the Earth ranking, occupying position 86. Although the ranking system was still confusing to many, that clearly indicated someone of high level. Joey was not interested in that and entered the Goblin dungeon directly on abyss difficulty, which shocked everyone present. Some teachers began to reflect that after the increase in resource distribution, many students had become far too arrogant. In Joey's case, he really did use an abyss stone to enter that difficulty. The stone cost 400 points, and he did not enter for free. While reflecting on the absurd amount of points he still possessed, a goblin tried to attack him sneakily, but failed immediately. It soon became clear that the number of goblins in that place was absurd. All of them were silver rank monsters, but that did not mean much in front of Joey's massive hammer. The real problem was the number. Since the goblins carried out suicidal attacks to gradually wear down his energy, Joey needed to act with more caution before attacking directly. After some time, he finally eliminated all the goblins and came very close to reaching level 20. Even though he was extremely exhausted, that was expected since it was the abyss difficulty. Without resting for long, Joey advanced to the boss room. There, the Goblin King was waiting for him, a level 24 creature of legendary rank. As soon as the fight began, Joey realized that his first attack had no effect at all. His axe simply did not work against that enemy. That happened because the Goblin King possessed a skill called Dominant Body, which completely nullified physical attacks. Faced with that, Joey changed his strategy and used the Chain of Light. With a single movement, he restrained the Goblin King and concentrated luminous energy into a devastating attack, defeating the enemy in an overwhelming manner. As a reward for defeating the Goblin King, Joey received 30 free attribute points and 30 skill points. Even so, he was unable to reach level 20, which made it clear how difficult it was to level up as he progressed. For breaking the dungeon record, Joey received an additional talent called Rapid Casting, which increased spell casting speed. That reward further reinforced his absurd growth. Meanwhile, outside, most students were complaining that the Abyss and Nightmare difficulties were extremely hard. Many watched the scoreboard, curious to know who was in first place and whether anyone had broken a record. Churon was also worried about Joey. After all, he had entered Abyss difficulty, a level that no one had managed to clear until then. That concern did not last long. Soon information appeared that Joey had cleared the Abyss dungeon and broken the record in just 10 minutes. Compared to the second place, he was 6 minutes ahead. As a direct consequence of that, Shiming Xuan's position in the ranking fell. Coincidentally, Shiming Xuan appeared at that moment. He had not managed to clear the Abyss difficulty and, to make matters worse, had even damaged a golden rank item during the attempt. The situation became even more bitter when he received the information that a mere freshman had surpassed him. At that moment, Joey came out of the dungeon. Shiming Shen went to confront him as he could not accept that a level 19 freshman had taken first place. However, Joey simply ignored him. He went straight to Churon, who was visibly emotional. She was surprised to learn that he had passed the Abyss difficulty, while she herself had struggled greatly on hard difficulty. Zhou Yi explained that things would soon get better because he would teach her how to deal with the dungeon. In addition, he had enough points to pay for several Abyss entries, both for himself and for her. He also commented that Abyss difficulty was not as impossible as it seemed. On Ximing Xuan's side, a friend tried to lift his spirits, saying that the most important thing was not to give up and try again. However, upon hearing comments that the dungeon was not that difficult and that Zhou Yi had points to spare to try as many times as he wanted, Ximing Xuan completely lost the will to continue and decided not to challenge it again. Returning to Zhou Yi and Churon when the two entered the dungeon together, Churon felt quite uneasy. She knew she was being sponsored by him. That made her remember the last time they had fought together at Storm Mountain, and also the reward she had given Zhou Yi on that occasion, which made her even more embarrassed. Even so, she commented that thanks to Zhou Yi's bravery, she had managed to keep her courage. He replied that this was only the beginning of their adventure together. With the conversation over, it was time to fight. As soon as the battle began, Zhou Yi summoned his giant hammer and cast several blessings. That did not surprise Churon, but the effect was impressive. Her base attributes increased drastically, growing by about a quarter, while her attack power almost doubled. With all those enhancements, the goblins, which had previously been difficult to face, began to be defeated with extreme ease. After some time, the two eliminated all the common goblins and advanced to the boss room. Facing the Goblin King, Churon asked how Zhou Yi had defeated that enemy last time. He explained that the Goblin King was extremely resistant to physical attacks, but very weak against magical attacks. Based on that, Churon decided to attack first. Her attack did indeed work, but in an unexpected way. Instead of injuring the Goblin King, it ended up strengthening him. That happened because the Goblin King was a demonic creature, and Churon's demonic power ended up serving as reinforcement for him. In response, the Goblin King used an earthquake ability that hurled everything around into the air. Zhou Yi panicked as he searched for Churon. She also fell into despair, not because of the attack, but because she believed she had completely ruined the fight. Zhou Yi tried to calm her down, saying that everything would be fine. However, when he used Light of Punishment, the attack had no effect at all. The Goblin King's magical barrier had been strengthened by Churon's earlier attack. The situation worsened even more when Zhou Yi used his strongest magical ability, the Chain of Light, and it was destroyed in a single move. Internally, Churon began to sink into despair. She felt far too weak and believed she was only getting in the way. At that moment, her bloodline began to manifest in her mind, stating that because she was weak, Zhou Yi was suffering during the battle. The bloodline said that if Churon wanted to fight alongside him, she would need more strength. Then, the bloodline offered her power. Meanwhile, on Zhou Yi's side, the situation was also becoming dangerous. He was taking such a beating that he began to consider unlocking his own bloodline as the battle was spiraling out of control. Suddenly, a gigantic attack appeared and severed the Goblin King's arm. At that moment, it became clear that Churon had changed completely. Her aura was unstable and her behavior had become extremely aggressive, as if she had lost control. Because of this transformation, the Goblin King's ability to absorb demonic energy did not work as expected. In fact, it did work, but in an exaggerated way. The Goblin King began to draw in more and more energy, without realizing that he was being overloaded. In the end, the one consumed by his own greed was the Goblin King himself. Churon stated internally that since he wanted power so badly, she would give him everything he desired. The result was straightforward. The Goblin King died, consumed by his own greed. On Zhou Yi's side, he did not immediately understand what had happened. He simply watched the scene, trying to process how the battle had ended in that way. After defeating the monster, Churon let out a strange laugh and slowly approached Zhou Yi, asking how they should proceed from there. She also asked whether he did not like this new version of her. In a moment of distraction, Zhou Yi's hand slipped, but he quickly regained control, suppressing the impulse thanks to the divine power he possessed. Faced with that sudden change, Zhou Yi asked whether that was really still the Churon he knew. Upon hearing this, her behavior changed instantly. The demonic power began to fade, and Churon, completely embarrassed, explained that it had happened because of her succubus demonic bloodline. Observing more closely, Zhou Yi felt relieved. He had even thought that Churon might have been possessed by some demon, but she explained that this was impossible. Even so, Zhou Yi commented that if she managed to control that demonic power, she would become much stronger. Now that the Goblin King had been defeated, Zhou Yi stated that they should make the most of the opportunities from that point onward. As students, that was the best time to evolve quickly. In simple terms, the farming phase had begun. Outside, a new announcement surprised everyone. First place in the Abyss ranking had been taken from Zhou Yi, something considered absurd, since no one besides him him had been able to clear that difficulty. To everyone's shock, the name that appeared in first place was Churon. This left everyone confused because not long ago she had still been struggling on hard difficulty. With these results, some students began to understand why certain classmates had seemed discouraged recently. It made no sense to compare themselves to monsters of that level within the university. Summarizing the events that followed, Zhou Yi and Churon began to constantly alternate in first place on the Abyss ranking. The two of them essentially dominated the podium. After several hunts, Churon mentioned that the Elemental House would set off fireworks that night and invited Zhou Yi to relax a bit. Sometime later, already at the Elemental House, Zhou Yi realized that night had fallen, which meant they had spent the entire day inside the dungeon. While observing the place, Zhou Yi noticed a huge statue. Churon explained that the statue represented the Mage Wei, known as the Guardian God. According to history, he had defeated countless monsters, but was eventually killed by a demon lord. His soul was completely extinguished, making any kind of resurrection impossible. Hearing this, Zhou Yi commented that he only knew the basics of the story and asked whether Churon could tell him more about the so-called Age of Darkness. She then began to explain that everything had started in the Golden Age, about 80 years ago, when truly talented classes began to appear. Because of the emergence of these special classes, many monsters began to be exterminated on a large scale. However, when humanity decided to strike back directly against the other world, the Age of Darkness fell upon the planet, bringing the most intense invasion of all. The elites of the Golden Age fought to the end and gave their own lives to contain that calamity. After 30 years of continuous war, the world finally entered the so-called Age of Peace, the period in which they live to this day. However, monsters began to appear again, which was extremely worrying. Compared to the past, they were still weaker, but their mere return was already a bad sign. Noticing Churon's concern, Zhou Yi tried to reassure her. He explained that this time, most of the creatures from the other world were only crossing through medium-dimensional rifts, which greatly limited their power level. In addition, humanity now possessed more advanced technologies and much stronger classes than in the past. Even if something happened, the situation was under control. At that moment, Churon interrupted the conversation and called Zhou Yi to watch the fireworks from a better spot. After that, there was a time skip. Zhou Yi was on a train, on his way to meet his sister. He felt a bit disappointed that he could not use teleportation as he had done with Su Mei, but at least he was returning home carrying the definitive cure for his sister's condition. Meanwhile, at home, Zhou Yun was arguing with her sister Qing, complaining that Zhou Yi had not arrived yet. Coincidentally, at that exact moment, Zhou Yi appeared. Yun immediately ran toward him. When he realized that his sister looked more lively and full of energy, Zhou Yi finally managed to relax. Turning his attention to Qing, he explained that he would stay there for only 3 or 4 days since his main objective was to carry out Yun's treatment. However, Qing was not satisfied with that and asked whether he had brought any gifts. Zhou Yi replied that he had. He handed her a special reward he had obtained earlier on Abyss difficulty. It was not just an ordinary gift, but a protective measure, since he intended to summon a golden rank bear to protect her. Soon after, 2 people arrived at the family's house. They were Secretary Zhao Wen and the priestess Li Na, who had come specifically to carry out Yun's treatment. Enin was completely shocked when he realized that the treatment would not be done only with the freezing lotus, which was already extremely rare, but also with S-rank freezing pill. Unable to contain herself, Yun asked how Zhou Yi had obtained something so absurd. As always, Zhou Yi replied that it had just been luck. Although it sounded like a weak excuse, it was the pure truth. Leaving that aside, Yun asked whether the treatment would hurt. Zhou Yi explained that it would not. She only needed to ingest the freezing pill, while he and the others would take care of the rest of the process. Next, Yun was positioned inside a magic circle, which seemed to be a type of formation linked to bloodline creation. Before she took the pill, Zhou Yi applied several buffs to her, ensuring that she would not suffer during the treatment. The absurd amount of power released during that process was so great that even Li Na began to question whether Zhou Yi was, at that moment, stronger than she herself was. It simply did not make sense. Her thoughts were interrupted when Zhou Yi asked for the treatment to begin. As soon as the magic circle was flooded with mana, the medicine was placed in the patient's mouth. Immediately afterward, an explosion of ice occurred, frightening everyone around. The reaction was instant, since everyone remembered what had happened to Qing the last time something similar took place, when she had nearly been completely frozen. However, this time Zhou Yi stated that it would no longer be a problem. He activated the halo of sacred fire and began to fully control the ice released by the explosion. Seeing the situation under control, Lina commented that from that moment moment on, they only needed to be patient and wait for Yoon to complete the awakening of her bloodline. Meanwhile, on Joy Yi's side, something unexpected happened. At the exact moment Yoon awakened her bloodline, she tore off her eye patch and was abruptly propelled into the air, which indicated yet another manifestation of the so-called Tinubio syndrome, something already known to everyone. Despite the initial shock, the bloodline awakening was completed successfully. Joy Yi approached to check whether his sister was alright, and she confirmed that she was. In addition, the pain she had been feeling had decreased considerably. Upon analyzing the situation more carefully, it became clear that the awakened ice bloodline granted her complete control over that element. This power was similar to Joy Yi's, although he also possessed an affinity with light. Faced with this, Joy Yi began to praise his sister, stating that she would certainly become very strong. At the same time, he reflected internally on the family's own bloodline. For such a powerful bloodline to exist, their ancestors must have been extremely strong. That thought, however, brought a bittersweet feeling, because despite that potential, they had suffered greatly throughout history. Leaving those reflections aside, Joy Yi asked Liana to examine Yoon once more, just to make sure nothing had been overlooked. Meanwhile, Secretary Zhao Wen began his reports, stating that more resources would be made available, not only for Joy Yi, but now also for Yoon. Hearing this, Joy Yi remembered that in the future, his sister would need to choose a class. He then reflected on which path she would follow. The decision was immediate, as Yoon stated that she wanted to become a mage. That choice seemed to suit her perfectly, and Joy Yi commented that when she reached level 10, he would obtain for her a conversion book to the hidden mage class. However, upon hearing this possibility, Yoon became even more excited, stating that it was great, since she felt a dark power awakening within her. That declaration left Liana completely nervous, as she began to wonder whether she had missed some important detail during the analysis, fearing that there truly might be some hidden dark power. However, after a careful check, it became clear that there was nothing wrong. That sensation came only from Yoon's imagination, a direct consequence of her well-known Tinubio syndrome, which made her believe in exaggerated powers and unfounded grand ideas. Realizing this, Joy Yi also concluded that that story about dark power made no sense at all. Even so, he decided that in the future he would show his sister what true dark power really was. While Zhao Wen and Qing laughed at the situation, Lai Na, for some reason, began to seriously reflect on that supposed power, wondering whether Yoon truly hid nothing beyond her fertile imagination. Meanwhile, Yoon began testing her new powers, summoning an ice spirit armed with several spears. The attack, however, did not even come close to Joy Yi, thanks to his defensive talent. Still, Joy Yi realized that his sister was truly strong for someone who had just awakened her bloodline. Because of that, he had already begun planning a rigorous training schedule for her. Yoon tried to escape by claiming that her syndrome had started acting up again, but this time the excuse did not work. When he realized that Yoon was a little discouraged and said that she would not let only Joy Yi carry the role of saving the world, he decided to act. Joy Yi summoned Gray and stated that he would train together with her. The idea was simple. If she did not want to train alone, then he would do it by her side. Gray, for his part, clearly showed no desire to train. Even so, since the two who did not want to train ended up together, Joy Yi stated that he would find a way to set up a perfect training schedule for both of them. After that, there was a time skip of a few days. During this period, Gray became completely exhausted, while Joy Yi sincerely thanked him for helping with Yoon's training. Changing the subject, Joy Yi began to wonder whether any of the houses had a teleportation portal that would allow his return to the school. At that same moment, Professor Su Mei appeared. According to her, the National Freshman Exchange competition was about to begin. The team would need 5 participants, and since Joy Yi was ranked first, he would automatically be the leader. As a result, it would be up to Joy Yi to choose the other 4 members of the team. Su Mei presented him with a list of the top 10 students. Without much hesitation, Joy Yi directly chose the top 4. This immediate decision made Su Mei question whether he truly intended to form the team that way, without analyzing the composition or the synergy among the members. In addition, she pointed out that among those chosen, there was no priest. Although Joy Yi was a paladin, his healing ability was still far inferior to that of a specialized priest, which could be dangerous in team battles. Even so, Joy Yi showed complete confidence. He stated that he was confident in individual competitions as well as in team battles. According to him, even if he were the only one left in combat, he would still be able to win. Faced with that confident stance, Su Mei decided not to insist further on the matter. Taking advantage of the conversation, she asked whether Yoon's bloodline awakening had occurred without any problems. Joy Yi confirmed that everything had gone well. Then, he took advantage of her presence to ask whether the school had any hidden mage class books. Sume explained that that type of book was absurdly rare, and asked why he was interested in it with such urgency. Zoe Yi then explained that after the frequent emergence of medium portals in several regions of China, he had begun to worry about his sister's safety. For that reason, he wanted to ensure that Yoon had enough power at least to protect herself. After hearing this explanation, Sume showed understanding, but made it clear that acquiring such a book would not be easy. She stated that the best path would be for Joy Yi to stand out in the freshman competition, while she took care of some personal matters. Yoon, in turn, did not quite understand that conversation, but Zoe Yi began to seriously reflect on the possibility of obtaining a hidden class book. By accessing the school system, Joy Yi discovered that the book cost around 20,000 points. Although it was not an absurd amount, it meant that he would need to save for at least half a year without spending practically anything. While he was still browsing the system, Joy Yi received a new notification. A mission had appeared, directly related to the National Freshman Exchange competition. The objective was simple: place among the top ranks of the competition, with rewards proportional to the ranking achieved. In another scene already in the meeting room, Professor Wu Meng informed the other masters that Joy Yi had directly chosen the top 4 students. This immediately generated comments, as the concern was once again raised that the team did not have a priest, something considered extremely risky. Some even questioned whether that team truly intended to win. Interrupting the discussions, the master of the elemental house stated that he saw no problem with that formation. According to him, Joy Yi was more than capable of protecting and keeping the entire team alive during the competition. In fact, that master knew the true power of Joy Yi's bloodline very well, unlike the other masters present. Even so, he knew that it was not worth commenting on that at that moment. While reflecting, the master of the logistics house realized that when analyzing Joy Yi's abilities, combined with the absurd number of buffs he possessed, it was clear that he fit almost perfectly into 3 different classes at the same time. In practice, Joy Yi functioned as a 3-in-1 combatant. Faced with that conclusion, all the housemasters gathered in the meeting room ended up agreeing with the team that Joy Yi had formed. Even so, before the start of the competition, Wu Mang decided to gather all the team members. He knew that in individual matches, each of them had a high chance of winning. However, in group battles, coordination was essential. For that reason, Wu Mang took responsibility for turning those 5 individuals into a well-coordinated team. Meanwhile, the team leader, Joy Yi, continued training tirelessly. At that moment, he was completing his daily mission when he received a message from the director, informing him that a special lesson had been prepared for him. Since this would be the first lesson Joy Yi would receive directly from a high-level instructor, he decided to choose skill points as his daily reward, as he did not know what kind of teaching or challenge might arise. This daily reward system was extremely advantageous for Joy Yi. He only needed to complete his morning exercises to receive constant improvements, which made his strength grow in an absurd way. Over time, this made him increasingly powerful in an almost disproportionate manner.